to Ottawa yet. No crown gave us what we've earned. Just dirt and fire and lessons learned. Now the ground it shakes, the steel it groans, and Alberta walks alone. We ride sovereign steel through fire, through frost. We ain't the last, we're the line they lost. Alberta stands never on its knees. A nation born in the forge of the free. From the rigs to the rails, the crops to the code, we lit their streets, we bore their load. They laughed at pride, they mocked the West, but freedom don't die, it just waits for the test. The cowboys ride, the farmers rise, 5 million strong under open skies. No leash, no lie, no foreign throne. This land is steel and it stands alone. We ride sovereign steel through fire, through frost. We ain't the last, we're the line they lost. Alberta stands never on its knees. A nation born in the forge of the free. Kill the mountain, can't drown the plain, can't burn the spirit that won't be chained. He stares down east with a calloused hand and says, this time we draw the line in the land. We ride sovereign steel through fire, through frost. We ain't the last, we're the line they lost. Alberta stands never on its knees. A nation born in the forge of the free.
Good evening, everybody. Oh, look, I'm little tiny guy. Welcome to the Calgary-Lougheed UCP presents The Courage to Listen, building a framework for a sovereign Alberta. We're just waiting for the live stream to actually start here. We were originally told it was going to start at 4:45 or 5:45, and that was 2 minutes ago. So that's why we did the introduction. I'm going to make myself really big, if you don't mind. Here, let me see. No, I'm still tiny. Oh man, it's been so long since I've actually been on here that I forget how these buttons all work. But thank you so much for joining us tonight. This was kind of a last minute thing for us. We weren't really sure if we were going to be presenting this at all. We had reached out, and special thanks to Daryl Comic from the UCP Lougheed Constituency Association, Eric Bouchard, allowing us to be able to do this for everybody out there. There's people have actually logged on to I should probably put the oh man. It has been one of those lives. This is actually the website that theCourageToListen.ca, And if you're not at the event already, unless you live next door, you're not going to get there because it starts at 6 o'clock. It is now, according to my Mac clock up there, 5:48. And as you can tell, I'm just stalling for time. No, not really. There's a few things I want to talk to you guys about. The event tonight is basically being put on by the UCP Calgary-Lougheed constituency, but it's also being sponsored by the UCP Calgary-Acadia, Calgary Southeast, Bonneville, Coal Lake, St. Paul, Grand Prairie, Wapiti, Highwood, Massachusetts, I can never pronounce that thing, Wetaskiwin, Airdrie East, and Calgary-Lougheed as well, of course, everybody out there. And I'm really excited about some of the speakers that are going to be on tonight. We have Ben Trudeau, no relation to, yes. He's a longtime advocate for democratic reform. Ben explores how Alberta can exercise its constitutional rights to protect public institutions of working class communities. Of course, we have Jeff Rath. I'll get to that in a little bit. We have Matthew Ehret. He's a Canadian author, and he's what does global finance and potential future leaders like PM Carney mean for Alberta's economy? People will truly benefit if decisions remain centralized in Ottawa. We have Chris Sims, Bruce Party. I'm kind of hearing stuff in the background, so I'm going to just see if I can wrap things up on here. Dr. Michael Wagner, which we've interviewed many, many times. Peter McCaffrey, as he's the president of the Alberta Institute. Man, if you've ever been to a UCP AGM, he is usually the guy that is talking on the mic. And with that, we also have Mitch Sylvester, of course, from APP. I'm going to jump onto the screen here, and I'll talk to you guys later.
But partly because I was born and raised in Calgary, and my dad was born and raised in Calgary. So my family has over 100 years of equity in this city. I remember as a teenage boy working on my dad's construction companies. He had two construction companies. One was a cribbing company with concrete. The other was a general contractor. And I distinctly remember when the National Energy Program was instituted by the federal government, how it crippled the economy of Alberta, but it almost decimated my dad's construction companies. So I am very well aware of the disparity that's happening and has happened to Alberta for all of these years. It's interesting, they've asked me to pray. It says on the program, Pastor, pray for peace. And considering some of the debates that have gone on between the separatists and the non-separatists and the all-separatists, and we don't know if we should separate, it's a kind of an interesting thing. But I want to remind you of something and leave you with a thought before I pray tonight. This province has a rich Christian heritage. And we've had premiers who preached on the radio to tell people about God and the importance of having God involved in what we do, not only in our cities, but in our province and in our nation. Unfortunately, the federal government has left the godly things altogether. It looks like the provincial government has embraced some of those things, but it's up for the grassroots Albertans to embrace the things that built this province to make it what it was. And my thought is this: it says here in the Bible that God himself has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth, and he has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings. So I want to give you a consideration tonight. I also want to give you a caution. If we don't bring God into the things that we plan, that we intend, that we decide, then it doesn't matter what we do, it will fail on either side. So remember that as different ones get up tonight and speak and say, well, we should go, and somebody says we shouldn't go, and we should have what Quebec has, and somebody says we should go all the way. Just remember that we're only here for a few short years, and it's our children who will inherit whatever it is that we leave them. And my prayer and my desire is that we can leave them something godly, which is what this province was originally built on. So if you would bow your heads with me, I will pray for peace before the debate. Father God, we come to you because, as I read in your word there, you have brought all nations into these times of the end where there's great strife, there's great testing, there's great trial. And yet you still remain the one who can cause things to work and cause economies to prosper and families to be blessed and cities to grow and do well, that we and our children might prosper. And so tonight, I pray in this place that is a house of God, that there would be a grace in this place as opinions are shared, as tempers might flare, as considerations are given to the arguments that are made on one side or the other, and that you would bring your wisdom through those who come here, that you would bring your truth, and that we would be able to take as intelligent people those things which will cause success for the province of Alberta, but also for the nation of Canada. We thank you for that. We pray for each person that speaks tonight and for your grace in this place. In Jesus' name, amen.
This is Jim Ferguson of Freedom Train International, and I have a gift for the people of Alberta. We stand with you, Alberta. We stand with all the Albertans in their quest for independence and sovereignty. We hope you like it, and I want you to know that patriots all around the world are watching Alberta right now. We stand with you, and I hope you enjoy this. Just remember, they can't kill the mountain. They can't drown the plain. They can't burn the spirit that won't be chained. We'll speak soon.
Ballots have been cast, the die is set, but Alberta ain't ready to kneel just yet. They chose their king, their power was met, but we don't answer to Ottawa yet. No crown gave us what we've earned, just dirt and fire and lessons learned. Now the ground it shakes, the steel it groans, and Alberta walks alone. We ride sovereign steel through fire, through frost. We ain't the last, we're the line they lost. Alberta stands, never on its knees. A nation born in the forge of the free. The rigs to the rails, the crops to the code. We lit their streets, we bore their load. They laughed at pride, they mocked the West. But freedom don't die, it just waits for the test. The cowboys ride, the farmers rise. 5 million strong under open skies. No leash, no lie, no foreign throne. This land is steel and it stands alone. We ride sovereign steel through fire, through frost. We ain't the last, we're the line they lost. Alberta stands, never on its knees. A nation born in the forge of the free. The mountain can't drown the plain, can't burn the spirit that won't be chained. He stares down east with a calloused hand and says, this time we draw the line in the land. We ride sovereign steel through fire, through frost. We ain't the last, we're the line they
Hello, everybody. How's everybody doing? All right. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's great to see so many familiar faces and some new ones too. My name is Eric Bouchard, and I'm the proud MLA for Calgary-Lougheed. Thank you. Thank you so much. You know, it's been just over 2 years since I was elected, and I can confidently say that I've learned a lot, and I mean a lot. And one of the biggest lessons I've learned is that there's still some who aren't very thrilled about the town halls that we host. Once again, we've had a few folks try to prevent this evening from happening, but we come together anyway by asking questions, one conversation at a time. And I'm willing to have a conversation with anyone, anywhere, anytime about the kind of future we want to build in this province. And I think many of you in this room feel the same way. We don't need to agree on everything. In fact, we probably won't. We can agree to disagree respectfully. That's the foundation of a free society. As many of you know, before I was in politics, I was a small business owner. And if there's one thing that experience taught me, it's that local matters. When you run a business in your own community, you understand quickly that decisions made hundreds, or in this case, thousands of miles away by people who've never set foot in your business often don't make sense. You learn to trust, help, and support your neighbors. You learn that responsibility isn't something you outsource. It's something you carry. And that's what sovereignty means to me. It's about self-determination and taking ownership of our challenges, our strength, and our future. It's a lesson I learned growing up in Quebec, a province that is sovereign in its own way, while still part of Confederation. Quebec taught me that cultural identity, local control, and national belonging aren't contradictions. They're part of the same conversation. I saw firsthand how a province could chart its own path, protect its language and culture, and demand a fair deal for real autonomy. And like Quebec, Alberta is a distinct society. Traveling across the country, it's become clear that Albertans hold unique experiences and worldviews. Last week, our government had the privilege of meeting with the Saskatchewan government. Many in Western Canada share our values, including freedom and duty. We don't wait to be told what to do. We do what needs to be done. G.K. Chesterton, a man who understood the value of localism long before it became a political buzzword, believed that real democracy thrives in communities where people understand their surroundings and are directly invested in their future. And that's what tonight is about. It's about rooting our discussion in the real, lived experience of Albertans, past, present, and future. It's about making sure that decisions that affect our businesses, our families, and our communities aren't being made by people who've never had to face the consequences. Before I end, I'm going to share with you that I reached out to the Monarchist League of Canada to invite them to speak tonight, and they declined. I would have welcomed their voice. My father came to Canada from England after the war, and my grandmother was a passionate monarchist. I also invited Thomas Lukaszuk, the former MLA, whose position is Alberta must remain within Canada and any form of separation must be rejected. He also declined. I think it would have been valuable to hear from him because that's the point. No voice should be silenced and all perspectives should be heard. So tonight we're going to hear from some incredible speakers. Some you'll agree with, some you might not. But all of them are here because they care deeply about Alberta and about the principles that shape our province. My hope is that you leave here tonight with a bit more information and a deeper sense of what sovereignty could mean and a renewed commitment to shaping the future of this province, our province, with clarity, respect, and the courage to listen. Thank you. Have a great night.
Aloha! Okay, that makes me feel so warm inside. Thank you so much for everyone who is here live. And of course, we got 6,000 people streaming out there. So welcome to The Courage to Listen. This is an amazing topic. And when we started this journey, we didn't have a federal election that was on the horizon. We also didn't have a whole bunch of town halls all over the province talking about sovereignty. We were going to be like the only one. So there's been over 100 town halls on sovereignty across the province, which is amazing when you think that that many people are interested in the topic. In fact, there was one here last night that had 600 people at it, one a couple weeks ago that had 1,200. So even in the city, this isn't a rural phenomenon. This is something that should be of question to all Albertans, regardless of where you are. I heard Eric talk about the variety of people that you're going to hear tonight. And I'm going to tell you this, they are all passionate. You will be convinced after every speaker that that is the answer. That's just how it's going to be. And each one of them will have powerful points that they're going to make with you. What I want you to do is really to have the courage to listen. We're trying to build a framework for sovereign Alberta within a united Canada. If you know anything about Calgary-Lougheed, we're okay with having one conversation at a time and having a topic that is absolutely crazy that people don't think that we should be talking about, like porn books in schools. Remember that one? That was one of our first town halls. It was called Let Kids Be Kids. We got shut down by many online people, but we still had the town hall. Turns out the government finally agreed with us that there shouldn't be soft porn in libraries for children. Calgary-Lougheed is a very active and very passionate CA. We're principled conservatives in Calgary-Lougheed. We believe in family, faith, freedom, free enterprise, fiscal accountability, and charity. That's the premise of everything that we do. So we're happy to be involved and to work with everybody that wants to have a voice. And so tonight you will hear that and you will be excited to hear that. How many people here in the room feel that Alberta is dealt with fairly by Ottawa? Oh, nobody. Anyone online? Nobody there either. We're going to explore that question tonight. We're going to help you. We're going to give you information. And to guide us through the evening is a super popular podcaster. We're so happy that Sean Newman has joined us to be our MC tonight. So give a warm applause for Mr. Sean Newman.
Well, we're back. I didn't think they would invite me back after the last one, but I guess they're entrusting me one more time. So this is the third time I've been here, but for those who are new, first off, good evening. I'm Sean Newman. I'm the host of the Sean Newman podcast right here in Alberta. And I wanted to start by saying thank you, not only to Calgary-Lougheed for entrusting me to MC again, but to everyone in attendance, everyone online, whether you're joining us here in person or joining us online. I just appreciate you giving time again. Your presence shows a commitment to engaging in ideas that matter. And that's something to be really proud of, to come and sit and listen to things that can be difficult at times. Tonight, we're diving into the bold, and if you're listening to the podcast earlier this week, often heated topic of Alberta independence. And we've got an incredible lineup tonight. He mentioned, Daryl mentioned 8 speakers to get us through this conversation. We got Dr. Michael Wagner, questioning Canada's sustainability, Ben Trudeau, exploring our constitutional rights, Matt Ehret, unpacking the global finances, impact on Alberta's autonomy. Mitch Sylvester will break down the referendum process. Chris Sim crunches numbers on the financial independence and what it could mean. Bruce Party's here. He's going to tackle government accountability. Peter McCaffrey will share insights on local governance, and Jeff Rath will weigh the pros and cons of a unity versus autonomy. And these voices, all these voices, will, I think, challenge us to think deeply tonight. Our theme tonight is courage to listen and is our guidepost. This isn't about agreeing with every word spoken here tonight. It's about having the courage to hear, reflect, and engage with open minds on a subject that shapes our future. So let's dive in and enjoy what I'm sure will be an engaging evening. Our first speaker has his PhD in political science, is the author of Time to Leave and Canada Cannot Be Fixed. He argues the status quo is unsustainable. Reform is blocked, Alberta's voice is ignored. Please welcome Dr. Michael Wagner.
Thank you, Sean, for that introduction. Tonight, I'm going to speak on the fact that Alberta must choose between the status quo and independence. Now, I think most Albertans currently feel that our province is not being fairly treated within Canada. I think that Daryl just mentioned that. Of course, we would prefer for Alberta to be fairly treated within Canada. Indeed, I think the old motto of the Reform Party, the West wants in, is still the true heart's cry of most Albertans. The West wants in. We want our voices heard in Ottawa. You could easily get a majority of Albertans to agree that if Canada could be reformed so that Alberta could fit properly within this country, that's what they would want. That's what people really want. Unfortunately, we cannot have what we want. The reform option for Canada is not available. For decades, Albertans and other Westerners have tried to get a better deal for the West, but to no avail. There wasn't anything wrong with their approach. They worked hard and did well. And I do think that the early period of the Reform Party is the truest expression of historic Western sentiment in terms of our relationship with Central Canada. The Reform Party effort was the right thing to do at the right time. The problem is that while the West wants in, the East does not want us in. That is the problem, the reality that we have to face. Therefore, in my view, Alberta only has two options: the status quo or independence. Now, to understand this point, it's important to look at Alberta's history over the last few decades. The Prairie provinces have had serious grievances with the federal government going back over a century, right from the very beginning of our existence here. So our place within Canada has had some significant difficulties over the years. However, those difficulties did not lead to a movement for independence until Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau came along. He wanted to fundamentally change this country by centralizing power more in the federal government and by moving the country in a more socialistic policy direction. He did many things to harm this country, in my view. One of the things he did was to unleash a political and economic attack on Alberta that was unprecedented in Canadian history. The federal government never attacked a province like it attacked Alberta in the 1970s, and this is important to remember. In 1973, Trudeau's government imposed a federal oil export tax to siphon revenues out of Alberta. At about the same time, a war in the Middle East caused the price of oil to skyrocket, and as a result, the export tax would cost Alberta billions of dollars of oil revenues that belonged here but went to the federal government. Those revenues were rightfully ours because natural resources belonged to the province. Premier Peter Lougheed called the export tax on oil, quote, probably the biggest ripoff of any province that's ever occurred in Confederation's history. Then throughout the 1970s, Lougheed fought to get Alberta a fair deal for its oil. But despite Lougheed's best efforts, things got much worse when Trudeau unleashed the National Energy Program, or the NEP, in October of 1980. The NEP devastated Alberta's economy, destroying businesses, destroying jobs, and devastating the lives of thousands of people. And you can still meet people today who can tell you how their dad lost their job or their family lost their home because of the deliberate policy of Pierre Trudeau in 1980 and the early 80s. Now, two of the Liberals' stated reasons for the National Energy Program were achieving greater energy self-sufficiency for Canada and Canadianizing the oil industry because they thought there was too much American ownership. But the publicly stated reasons offered by Trudeau and his cronies were largely a smokescreen. And we know that because several years later, Marc Lalonde, who had been energy minister at the time of the National Energy Program, he later admitted that those weren't the real reasons, the ones that they offered publicly. And he's quoted as saying this. This is what Marc Lalonde said, quote, "The major factor behind the NEP was not Canadianization or getting more from the industry or even self-sufficiency. The determinant factor was the fiscal imbalance between the provinces and the federal government. Our proposal was to increase Ottawa's share appreciably so that the share of the producing provinces would decline significantly and the industry's share would decline somewhat. That is the real purpose of the National Energy Program, was for the federal government to confiscate much of Alberta's oil wealth." Now, let me repeat, this sort of attack by the federal government on one particular province is unprecedented in Canadian history. Now, the pent-up anger towards Trudeau's attacks on Alberta would subsequently contribute to the rise of the Reform Party of Canada, although the actual event that triggered the creation of the Reform Party of Canada was undertaken by Prime Minister Brian Mulroney. You might remember that in 1986, Brian Mulroney's government had recently purchased CF-18 fighter jets, and they needed to find a city or a company that could maintain those fighter jets. It was a very large government contract to maintain the CF-18 fighter jets. There were two cities in Canada with the facilities to maintain them, Winnipeg and Montreal. So the government held a competition to see which city should win the contract. And Winnipeg won that contract according to the government's criteria, and Mulroney awarded the contract to Montreal. This, of course, led to considerable uproar and anger in the West, and that outrage led to the creation of the Reform Party of Canada. With a CF-18 fighter jet contract being awarded to Montreal, Albertans realized that it didn't really matter which political party was in power in Ottawa. Unless the rules, the constitutional rules were changed, the West would continually be disadvantaged and ripped off. So the Reform Party of Canada began forming under the leadership of Preston Manning, and Manning wanted the new party to advocate for the West getting equal treatment within Canada rather than separating from Canada. The idea was to get the national institutions of Canada reformed so that the voice of the West could be heard within the national government in Ottawa, and our voices would not be ignored as they had been for so long. So the Reform Party of Canada, in 1993, in the federal election, they won 52 seats from the West. And then in the federal election in 1997, they won even more seats from the West. So we had our voice in Ottawa. We elected our MPs and sent them to Ottawa. But the reforms that we desired as Westerners did not materialize. Why not? Because the federal government does not care what reforms Alberta wants for this country. Academics Roger Gibbons and Lolene Berdahl explain Central Canada's attitude towards the Reform Party this way. I'm going to quote from these academics, Roger Gibbons and Lolene Berdahl. This is what they said, quote, "The Reform Party's clarion call that the West wants in was widely derided outside the West as narrow regionalism unsuitable to a truly national party. Indeed, the party system has helped to define regional in the case of the West, and the West alone as somewhat antithetical to national. Parties based largely in Ontario and Quebec are self-defined as national, a definition generally accepted by the media and the elite political discourse. Parties based largely in the West are defined and defined successfully by their opponents and the media as regional. The West is the only Canadian region earmarked in this fashion, and the only region with interests assumed to be at odds with the national interest, whatever that might be. So this is why the Reform Party was unable to achieve its objectives, because the interests of the West are assumed to be at odds with the national interest." Now, besides the Reform Party, the West expended considerable efforts trying to achieve Senate reform. During the conflict between Alberta and Pierre Trudeau in the 1970s, our Premier, Peter Lougheed, created a Citizens Advisory Committee on the Constitution to make recommendations to the provincial government about how Canada could be reformed. One of the members of that committee was Jean Deas, a University of Calgary professor of law, constitutional law, and he convinced the rest of the committee that the way to improve Canada was to change the Senate. If we made the Senate elected, because our Senate still is not elected, it's appointed by the Prime Minister. If we had elected senators with an equal number of senators from each province, that would be the kind of reform in our national institutions where the Western provinces could be properly represented. So because of that committee's work and Jean Deas, Senate reform became a priority of the Alberta government. Then in 1981, the Canada West Foundation published a significant proposal for Senate reform entitled Regional Representation in the Canadian Partnership. It was written by three people, one of whom was Senator Ernest Manning. Ernest Manning had been Alberta's longest serving premier and also a political scientist and another prominent person. So they wrote this very significant proposal for Senate reform. Their central argument was that Canada needed to reform its national institutions in order to provide a voice for the West within the national government. Otherwise, the West might separate from Canada. They proposed Senate reform as a way to get Western voices heard within Canada's national government. Subsequently, in 1983, an Alberta Committee for an Elected Senate was created to promote this idea. It was headed by a guy named Bert Brown, who was a very well-known Senate reform activist. It was also at this time when Ted Byfield of the Alberta Report magazine invented the term Triple E to describe a particular form of Senate reform that would be very beneficial for the West. And so the Alberta Committee for an Elected Senate, its ideas became more popular outside of Alberta, so it was changed to the Canadian Committee for Triple E Senate. So the idea of the Triple E Senate would enable the Senate to properly represent provincial interests. The Triple E's stood for, number one, there'd be an equal number of senators from each province. Number two, the senators would be elected. And three, they'd have effective powers to block the House of Commons. So a Triple E Senate along those lines would give the West representation within the national government, and we would not feel that we're being ignored all the time. Now, the Alberta Progressive Conservative Party, which of course at that time was the governing party, endorsed the Triple E Senate proposal at a 1984 convention. Then in March 1985, the Alberta government's Special Select Committee on Senate Reform also endorsed the Triple E Senate proposal and recommended that the Alberta government endorse it. A few months later, Don Getty became premier. He too personally endorsed, and on behalf of the Alberta government, the idea of the Triple E Senate as a reform that Canada needed. And then in 1988, he created a Senate Reform Task Force to promote the Triple E Senate idea right across Canada to the other provinces. Then in October of 1989, Alberta held Canada's very first Senate candidate election. For the very first time in Canada, there was an election for senators, and the person who won that was Stan Waters of the Reform Party, and Brian Mulroney actually did appoint him to the Senate. So that was the very first time in Canadian history there was an elected senator. Now, despite the best efforts of Alberta government and the Reform Party, Senate reform then stalled. However, there was one more chance at Senate reform. After the Reform Party was transformed into the Canadian Alliance, one of the original reformers, Stephen Harper, became leader of the Canadian Alliance. Then in 2003, he led the Canadian Alliance to join the Progressive Conservative Party of Canada to form the new Conservative Party of Canada. Stephen Harper was the leader of that party. And of course, in 2006, he was elected as Prime Minister. Now, after winning the 2006 election, Harper aggressively pursued Senate reform using the powers at his disposal as Prime Minister. In May of 2006, Harper's government introduced a Senate reform bill into the Senate itself, and Harper testified to the Senate committee studying that bill, and that's very unusual for a Prime Minister to testify before a Senate committee, but it shows how strongly Stephen Harper actually believed in Senate reform. Then a few months later, his government also introduced a Senate reform bill into the House of Commons that would have authorized consultative elections for senators in Canada. That's the same kind of thing that Alberta's been doing, where we'd have elections for senators, and they were consultative because the Prime Minister would not be under obligation to appoint the senators who were elected, but there would be pressure on him to do so. And a number of Alberta senators in recent years were elected through these consultative elections. So that's what one of Harper's bills was trying to achieve. Now, these bills that I just mentioned, they both died, but Harper would reintroduce the bills into the Senate and into the House of Commons to try and keep the Senate reform movement going. So during his first 7 years in office, 3 such bills were introduced into the Senate and 5 were introduced in the House of Commons. This just shows how hard Stephen Harper was trying to push the Senate reform idea. Then in 2007, he appointed Burt Brown to the Senate. Now, Burt Brown had been the head of the Canadian Committee for Tripoli Senate. It was well known. He had won 2 of the Senate consultative elections in 1998 and 2004. But by appointing Burt Brown to the Senate, it was showing, again, his commitment to Senate reform. Now, problems arose because in 2012, the Quebec government initiated a reference case challenging Stephen Harper's Senate reform bills. So the Quebec government did this reference case to the Quebec Court of Appeal to ask the Quebec Court of Appeal if what Stephen Harper was doing was constitutional. Now, to head off this reference case from Quebec, Stephen Harper himself then initiated a reference case to the Supreme Court of Canada so that he could be the one asking the questions of the court and perhaps get a better outcome. But as it turned out, in fact, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that any kind of Senate reform, even the kind that Stephen Harper wanted, could only be achieved through a constitutional amendment. So by saying it could only be achieved through a constitutional amendment, that basically killed the Senate reform movement because basically it made it impossible. So here we see a man, Stephen Harper, dedicated to Senate reform, finding that once he became Prime Minister, his attempts at Senate reform were thwarted at every step of the way. Of course, the opposition party has opposed his Senate reform ideas. The Senate itself opposed them. Many people within his own caucus opposed the Senate reform ideas. Many provincial premiers opposed it. And of course, the courts finally put an end to it. So here you have it. Stephen Harper, a man who was committed to constitutional reform to benefit the West, became Prime Minister, and over a period of years used every tool at his disposal to reform the Senate. But he could not prevail in the face of intense opposition from Central Canada. If Stephen Harper could not reform the Senate, then it cannot be done. If the Prime Minister of the country cannot push through reforms to change the Senate for the benefit of Alberta and the West, it can't be done. And if Preston Manning and the Reform Party cannot get the West's voice heard within Ottawa, then it can't be done. Albertans must realize that we sent our best people to Ottawa to fix the system, but the system could not be fixed. Spending the next few years trying to reform Canada's Constitution would end in frustration and failure, as it always has in the past. Now, we got to look back at this history I've just talked about very briefly, and we have to look back at this history and we need to ask, what more could we have done? What more could we have done? We spent decades trying to reform this country. We tried decades trying to reform the Senate and getting elected representatives who could change for us there. We've tried that. What else could we have done? The game is over. It's time for Alberta to secede from Canada and become an independent country. With our own country, we will be able to elect leaders who will answer to us and do what's best for us, not what's best for Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal. In this way, we will be able to achieve the greatest level of freedom and prosperity possible for our families and for our descendants. We need independence, not the status quo. Thank you.
How on earth is it? How is it that Michael Wagner goes fast on me, the first speaker? That's a great start. I'm sitting there and they're all giving me a hard time in the back. Sean's going to keep us on time tonight. Yep, we're going to go over all this stuff, Michael Wagner. I'm sitting there and I'm like, he's about to wrap up. Oh my goodness. All right, cool. We're off to a running start. All right, our next speaker, founder of Alberta Free and a longtime advocate for democratic reform. Our next speaker will explore how Alberta can exercise its constitutional rights to protect public institutions and working class communities. Please give a warm welcome to Ben Trudeau.
Well, good evening. I've been told that I shouldn't introduce ourselves, but I made a couple of slides here that I don't know if I can get as well, the little clicker to get these slides going. But basically, I will put one straight fact right now. My relationship with Trudeau. Next slide. So that my correct answer is yes. Yes, I'm first cousin 13 removed from Pierre. Next slide. I don't know about Justin. So, thank you. Thank you. All right, so I was born in 1972 from a very politicized family. I've worked at the organizer and started very early. First referendum, I joined the Liberal Party of Quebec after the Meech Lake failure. Worked through the 92 referendum and then the 95 referendum. And then I became born again Christian on November 30th, 2003, which brought me a break. Thank you. So, and already at the time, I was a very sovereignist show split on ways and means. I was very controversial, and when I was 22 then. In the bottom picture there, that was the leader of my party, the IDQ, Mario Dumont, who was, and we were very influential in choosing the question of the 95 referendum. Following that, I've worked for the federal government under the first Harper government with Jean-Pierre Blackburn. That brought me to Alberta, moved here in 2008, got married in 2011, have 4 kids. I am an Albertan, as much as I used to be a Quebecer before. And after the election, I started a lobbying company with my business partner, George Bears, who's sitting right there. And we've been lobbying to make Alberta more sovereign, to make Alberta self-sustained. Short history, it's important to go back there. So 1534, this is where France start colonizing New France. Through the first 220 years, basically, before the English came, they farmed, they developed Montreal, they also developed all the Midwest, all the Great Lake down to the Mississippi, were all developed by Montrealers. When the U.S. became independent, the king started giving land to Americans that want to remain loyal to the king. And of course, Quebec is bordering New Hampshire, New York, Vermont. So they start giving land that has been farmed by Quebecer for 150 years. So Quebecer didn't like that and said, no, you won't grab my land. And they revolt. And that was a Patriot revolt that was squished by hanging the 12 main leaders of that revolt, including lawyers and notaries that were fighting against that. And then when you look at that in 1867, it was more of a peace treaty than a constitution. So a constitution is not a real constitution. It was a peace treaty. They brought 2 other provinces to balance the thing, to make the English stop fighting with the French of Lower and Upper Canada. Then if we, let's look at that a bit. We'll go back to Alberta politics. I believe that resumed the situation right now. Okay, a lot of Albertans had a lot of hope on a government change, and the problem is not there. The problem doesn't lay who sits in Ottawa. The problem is structural. The problem is made to keep Ottawa and the East in power. The problem, though, of that is that they have a pain in the butt called Quebec. And Quebec is probably the most efficient legislature on the planet to use the Westminster system. Nobody else in Quebec know better the Westminster system and how to use it. Okay, so Quebec, when the English took over, there's some stats here that 6% of English were controlling 90% of the Quebec economy. The judges, English, were paying twice what a French judge would be paid. 80% of the deputy ministers were English. In 1899, in Griffintown, in Pointe-Saint-Charles, in Montreal, the life expectancy was 19 years old. In the French community, no loans for the French. This is why Caisse Populaire Desjardins, the credit union, was founded, because a bank wouldn't loan to a French. And the conscription to a French Canadian in the First World War would take your 18-year-old kid, put it on the battlefield, and it was forbidden to him to speak French because the captain needed to hear what they were saying. So that was the state of the French there. It's important to know that because from there, after the war, there was an activation of the independence movement. It started by a publication. Well, first, Duplessis was the premier, adopted the flag, brought the taxes in. Meanwhile, the Catholic Church was overarching, controlling. So in Quebec, you couldn't buy meat on Friday because it was forbidden by the Catholic Church. The priest would come home and ask the lady why she hadn't had babies that year. It was every night at 7 o'clock, everybody on their knees to do the rosary with the cardinal. The baby boomers changed everything. So you have I will just go. This is what the independence movement looked like in the 60s in Montreal. Over 100 bombs being planted by the FLQ, Front de Libération du Québec. What's interesting in all that story is that all the actors, worked for Pierre-Elliott Trudeau in the 50s. All of them, without an exception. He had a publication named Cité Libre, which translates to free speaking. That was an anti-clerical publication. And he hired René Lévesque as journalist. He hired Pierre Vallière as journalist. Pierre Vallière was the founder of the FLQ. So Trudeau knew everybody there. The other thing that he did is that he managed to become friend with all the dictators of the planet because the people of the FLQ were going to get training so they were training with Castro, they were training with Arafat, they were training in Algeria after the revolution in '62, they were training with the ACN for the ANC in South Africa. So Trudeau became friend with all these guys. On October 16, the first thing that he did as well when he became prime minister, he moved the headquarters of the Canadian Army from Ottawa to Montreal. So he was preparing that. He was trying a way to trap them, and he did. So October 16, 4 a.m., he called the war measures. The Liberal Party distributed a list that they built up of 459 names. All these people were busted in their house at 4 a.m., dragged out of bed, put in prison. So out of them, these group there, these 11, were still in jail in 1975 without trial. And the one that you see there was extradited to Cuba. And when he came back 14 years later, he was arrested coming out of plane for no reason. So this is what fueled the constitutional crisis that led to the two referendum, 1980, that was lost by 10%, and the one that was part of 1995 that was lost by 1.5% out of 4.6 million vote, 95% participation. Now, based on that, Quebec made move to change their situation and use the Westminster system to their advantage. And when I hear Albertans saying like, oh, of course, Quebec, special treatment. No, Quebec didn't have special treatment. Quebec won and earned with blood what they get. And they learn how to use the Westminster system to their advantage. And the good thing is that it developed a culture in Quebec that is very different than the political culture here in Alberta. So the problem with politicians in Alberta is that for the past 100 years, it's been overwhelmingly conservative. So I remember when I moved here in 2008, I believe there was something like 8 people in the opposition. I mean, so there's no opposition. When there's no opposition, you have to rule for everyone. But in Quebec, there's many opposition. And when you make a campaign, when Parizeau ran his campaign in September 1994, and he said in his campaign, within a year that I'm elected, there's a referendum. Well, within a year he was elected, there was a referendum. It's not a joke. This is a program. People vote for a program. I realized that here programs are secondary. No, you have a bunch of stuff in the program, you're voted in, and then you don't see anything materialize. For me, it was a shock, to be frank with you. And a huge difference between Quebec politician and Alberta politician is that Alberta politician often ask the permission. Can we do that? In Quebec, they do it, and if you're not happy, sue us. That's the difference. In Alberta, they comply with regulation, and then they fight in court, and they hope they win. No, in Quebec, they don't comply with regulation. If you're not happy, sue us. So, I think that Quebec start doing recently, they start passing law against the monarchy. The last one, so May 27, 2025, the king is giving the throne speech. At the same time, the Quebec National Assembly is assembled. They stop everything when the king's speech starts, not to listen to the speech, but to vote, to pass a motion to drain the crown. So they pass a motion saying that we don't want to pay allegiance to the king anymore. That followed in 2022 a motion that to be an MLA in Quebec, you don't have to pay allegiance to the crown. And that followed a defunding of the lieutenant governor office in 2023. And then what they've done, they courier that motion to the king after his speech. They were in hand. Okay. Now, let's speak about equalization. Everybody's, say, oh, Quebec equalization, Quebec equalization. This is what the real number of equalization transfer. So this number is per household since 1957, how much were transferred. Quebec is 7th position. The first position, of course, are the territories. The second one, Prince Edward Island, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia. In Canada, to change the constitution is a 750 principle. 7 provinces representing 50% of the population. Do you think that these 3 provinces will ever vote to get rid of that? For us right now, when you drive on the street, you look at every house in Alberta, every house in this province paid $100,000 to the country so far. This is for the Aboriginal people, including a 61 billion settlements in different courts that they had in the past 10 years. This is what every household received by the federal government. Does it show? I believe this is like pure fraudulent management from the First Nation. That's my opinion. So, what I've done, I put all the ministries in Alberta on one column, and all the ministries in Quebec. In Quebec are socialists, everybody knows that, but the socialists found a way to have 3 less ministers than Alberta, who's conservative, so that's another point. But so if you look at the Executive Council, what Alberta did after the 98 judgment of Supreme Court, they created a Secretary of Canadian Affairs. What it is about 2,000 bureaucrats sitting in Gatineau on the other side of the bridge of Ottawa, and their job is to harass the federal bureaucrats every day. And what they do, so in Quebec, when you file your tax, you file a provincial tax and federal tax. Your federal tax, you send your check directly to Ottawa. What this group there, what the Secretariat, the Secretariat to Canadian Relations, what they do, they go to every penny, and then they look at the service they receive for the federal, and they challenge every penny. They say, you're supposed to give us that. We can do that service for $500. You charge us $1,000, give us $500 back. And that's their job. And every year, you know how much they recuperate from what they sent to Ottawa? Over 200%. So you look at, so what I've done in every ministry, so in the left column, you have the Alberta ministry, on the right, the equivalent in Quebec, and basically what need to be added to take full power and full advantage of what the Constitution gave us to do. So you look at agriculture, in Quebec, they do their own food inspection, they choose what goes on the shelf, they don't care what Canada Food said and health. They oversee and override all of their health projects in the province. In Indigenous relationship, they manage all the Indigenous program in the province to make sure that it's a link with what they're doing. On the hospital, in fact, I have a friend, he told me 2 weeks ago, he said, "Hey Ben, I'm going to Quebec." So what for? He said, for knee surgery. I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, there's a doctor in Red Deer that does knee surgery, and he rents a surgery room in Quebec because he cannot have it here. And he brings 12 patients at a time to get his knee surgery in Quebec." And so again, and that's related to my own experience. In 1998, we're doing our AGM in Quebec City for the ADQ, and I was dealing with a health file, and I was proposing to enable the doctor to rent the operation room because the province didn't have the money to run them full time. So, and I had 7,000 people protest. The union raised people, they protested. There's the police that came in with their shield, and they put me in the broom closet for 2 hours. When I came out, my car was totally vandalized, destroyed, not usable. The insurance paid for it, but and now they have private hospital. So we can do that. If you look again, we can control all the research. One interesting one is that they control their immigration and they control their EI as well. So they do not control what the feds pays, but they control how they pay, who they pay, and why they pay. And they control all the training as well, all the professional training to be fit to what Quebec needs. So, and then for the immigration, when you immigrate to Quebec, you have to sign a citizen contract. And if you don't sign that citizen contract, so it goes through I think it's like 3 mornings of classes with Quebec history, and then you have to sign that you will learn to speak French. If you don't, and if you don't have health care, you don't have a driver's license, and you get out of the province. You're not welcome. So, and all that is constitutional. Quebec controls all of their trade. It's the Gérard Lajoie principle from the 60s. Again, according to the Constitution, we have the right to have offices. Quebec, I heard Alberta has something like 13, probably closet office around the world. Quebec has 53. And now that they're 53, they are prestigious location. In New York, they are a full floor at the Rockefeller Center. They are on Piccadilly Circus in London. They all have the best location to do reception, to bring business people in. It's funny because when Premier Smith went for the inauguration of Trump, she was talking that she was at the Washington embassy, and there was nobody from Quebec there. Why? Because they were at their embassy. You know? So the other thing that Quebec did in '84 didn't work, sadly, because the change of government, but we can do it, is that they were about to sign a lease for an island in the Bahamas and create a link and create Quebec territory outside of the province. And that's too, it's constitutional. So that's something we could do. Then if I keep on, so I have a document that will be online that do that, but most likely, most important, collect our tax, collect our pension. The Caisse de dépôt et placement in Quebec started at the same time as the CPP, is 2.5 more performant than the CPP. They have 100 billion less in bank than the CPP with 24% of the population. They own the Cross Iron Mill here. They own the outlet in Edmonton. This is the Quebec government that owns that. So to achieve this, you need no referendum, no court decision, no constitutional challenge, no permission to ask anyone. Strictly majority government in the legislature can do it. And if we do that, we're gonna render Canada so dysfunctional that they will beg to come sit at our table to negotiate a new deal. Thank you.
Done. Yeah, thanks. A Trudeau speaking truth in Alberta. Didn't think I'd see that. Somebody better pinch me. I think I'm dreaming up here. Imagine walking around Alberta with that name. He first came on the podcast in 2021, and we had to lead off. It's in the show notes. I just looked at it today. It's like, he's not related to Justin, I promise, right? Like that's the temperature. Thanks, Ben. Our next speaker is a Canadian journalist, lecturer, historian, and founder of the Canadian Patriot Review and Rising Tide Foundation. He's also authored the Untold History of Canada series. He's going to discuss what does global finance and potential future leaders like Prime Minister Mark Carney, that is, mean for Alberta's autonomy? Who will truly benefit if decisions remain centralized in Ottawa? Please welcome to the stage, Matt Ehret.
Not working out. Oh, hello, everybody. All right, this microphone works. Yeah, everyone can hear me okay, right? Okay, good. All right, and I've not used this clicker before, so let's go see. There we are. Thank you for coming, and I have a limited amount of time. There's a lot of big ideas that I do want to go through, so I'm going to try to be as efficient as I possibly can. I tentatively was asked what do I want to speak about, and I'm a historian, so I like a lot of historical context on whatever I'm going to talk about. Now, the focus of what I'm going to say, as Sean pointed out, will be to bring up a few points of importance as far as what Carney represents, not just as a person, but as the representation of a certain political ideology about how the world should operate that's been inserted to impose a certain type of policy and paradigm, both onto Canada, but that's a part of a broader system. I'm the editor and founder of a magazine that I set up in 2012 called the Canadian Patriot Review. That's issue number 6, April 2013. And I, at the time, we were really mobilizing in Ottawa with an organization called the Committee for the Republic of Canada. And that I'd been working with them for about 10 years, lobbying in Ottawa, working on seminars, conferences, trying to invite MPs, senators to come in and participate in a political briefing about the oncoming economic collapse that anybody looking at the right variables could understand that we were sitting on a bubble, a time bomb that was not resolved in 2006, 2007, 2008, when a giant subprime mortgage bubble or subprime bomb was detonated. But it was a reminder that we just bandaged it over. Nothing was resolved. The derivatives, the global speculative assets that far outweigh the global GDP was never resolved. The banks just became even bigger, right? The too big to fails became even bigger. And the party kept going in a different function. So we had a campaign around stopping the bail-in regime. That just got a lot louder. Yeah. Stopping the bail-in regime. And the bail-in regime, we put Mark Carney on the cover at the time with Flaherty, because that was something formulated by Mark Carney in 2010 as a program that when the banking system would go through its next systemic breakdown, instead of printing money from the outside to bail out the banks, the idea that Carney put forth with Mario Draghi, another former Goldman Sachs investment banker, put forth is that we could confiscate people's savings and transform it into bank stop to keep bankrupt banks afloat, because the banks have increasingly become, especially on Bay Street, Wall Street, the City of London, gamblers. It's become a casino. No longer have banks been serving the function that banks are designed to function, which is to provide credit for the productive economy, keep savings, provide loans, not that. The primary function, especially since the 70s, has been to gamble to make money with money, basically on unpayable rates of debt and different kinds of debt, which has resulted, like I said, in a time bomb. So we had a campaign to try to stop this. During the course of that time, I started putting together a lot of work because I was operating within Canada and I wanted to know, what is this thing I'm interfacing with? There seems to be something frightening many of the members of parliament, that they're aware that there's a power that they cannot speak its name. There's something which is exerting pressure that I needed to understand. And so I put myself with a few of my colleagues to work trying to piece together, what is the Privy Council? What are the decision-making centers that both today and through our past has shaped or misshaped Canada? And I found, again, and it manifested in some books as well, the Untold History of Canada books, which I began publishing to sort of document some of the findings. but it wasn't looking good. It wasn't looking pretty, and I became increasingly aware that the hope for Republic of Canada was not going to be something I would see in my lifetime. And that, as Ben was mentioning, when you start looking at the deep state structures of Canada, the fact that Pierre Elliott Trudeau was part of an operation that was running terrorist agencies tied to the FLQ, running letter bombs and justifying martial law in Quebec in order to shut down an independence movement, as well as extract Christianity itself from having any influence upon policy from Quebec in 1970. That was the October crisis. That's a big deal. And the question is, did that disappear? What did Pierre Elliott Trudeau actually represent when he was inserted to bring about a technocratic overhaul of our government? What did that mean? Why did the RCMP have to change and create this CSIS in 1983, run by Pierre Elliott Trudeau's counsel, Michael Pitfield? Why did they do that when RCMP was discovered to have been behind running these different FLQ so-called terrorist cells? And did it stop after 1983? Why did CSIS destroy all of their archives from Pierre Elliott Trudeau in 1989? And we only discovered this in 2019 when historians went to actually read the Pierre Elliott Trudeau archives. Why did they say they just destroyed it 20 years earlier? What did they have to hide? And also, similarly, why did the RCMP get found guilty by a BC Superior Court in 2016 when they were found to have created a terrorist cell of Islamic terrorists who were trying to create a bomb on Canada Day in 2016? And it was discovered that the idiot couple that became radicalized and became a part of this thing were found to have been recruited, given instructions to make the bombs, deployed by every member of that cell being affiliated with the RCMP. And they were acquitted. So maybe there's some bad habits that continued on that were tied to decision-making processes that have nothing to do with the elected part of our government that we are told is our government. So Mark Carney today represents something as a continuity of policy and a method that I want people to just think about a little bit today. And I think it has a lot to do, well, there's three items I'm going to touch upon quickly in the next 14 minutes. Number one, his policy to bring Canada into the European Union, which he announced as part of the Rearm Europe War Plan. Canada, as of today, is now part of the Rearm Europe Plan. That is something to create a massive 150 billion euro budget that will be part of a massive escalation to prepare for an oncoming war with seeming rivals, Russia, China, others. Also, as of June 23rd, they passed the Canada-EU Comprehensive Integration Partnership, which is like an integration on green energy, military, security, you name it, that happened. Fit for 55 Agenda 2030 also. Canada's participation in NATO and NORAD has also been increased with this. To bring King Charles into greater decision-making within Canada, that was announced with the request that Charles, develop the speech to open up the Parliament. And then to lock Canada into the Golden Dome, which is another thing that was modeled on the Israeli Iron Dome that was rebranded because it had a bit of a bad name a few months ago, called the Golden Dome, which I want to say something about too. That's part of a very, very toxic set of ideas. So military suicide, as I mentioned, June 23rd, it did happen. We are now part of this war plan to assist Europe to continue to militarize. We've been told, and there's all sorts of strange statistics being put forth to try to brainwash Canadians that half of your fellow Canadians want to join Europe. I don't think that's true. I've never met a single Canadian. Even I come from the East Coast. I've never met even an East Coaster that wants to do that. I don't know anybody that wants to do that. But you can see that there's an intention to try to massage people's opinions towards a certain consensus that they want us to be herded into. I mentioned quickly the Golden Dome plan. This is based upon the conception that power projection needs to be consolidated and determined by automated AI systems that Silicon Valley has been brewing that need to replace human decision-making in military affairs, with a vastly expanded military defensive shield, a long-range missile shield in the Canadian Arctic, which, by the way, Justin Trudeau had already adopted and approved in April of 2024. Mark Carney is completely on top of it, as was Pierre Poilievre. And this is something which I think is not just a danger for other nations, but also it could be used against the people living within that continent too. So it has a dual aspect to it. I think that that shouldn't be ignored. And the fact that certain agencies that are tied to things like Elon Musk's operations or Palantir that are tied to the CIA should not be ignored either, and that have certain transhumanist ideologues running it who believe that there is a master class that should somehow manage the human herd. That shouldn't be ignored as sort of factors that are governing our children's lives. And yeah, I'm not joking. When I said that Canada officially has put forth an approval, we're told that Mark Carney represents everything Donald Trump is not. Well, on this point, that's not true. And Canada has officially put forth a very positive position on joining this Golden Dome. And just to get across the context of the policy that we're supporting Europe, or we're getting enmeshed in, both in Europe as well as of the USA for war with other countries. The current spectrum or layout of US military bases around the world is just laid out there, of which there are about 893 US military bases that I know of, including another 290 bioweapons laboratories spread out outside of the US border itself, mostly surrounding, China, Russia. And there's a certain doctrine behind that too, which is not a great one. So do we want to be a part of that as Albertans? Economic suicide. If we're going to enmesh ourselves into the economic destiny of what's been put forth for Europe, what does that look like? Well, just to get across, I mean, the policy that we've all been sucked into since the days that Maurice Strong took control of Canada through things like the Club of Rome of Canada that Pierre Elliott Trudeau, Michael Pitfield co-founded with many of those figures that Ben Trudeau mentioned that ran Cité Libre. Many of those figures, including Maurice Lamontagne, the former head of the Privy Council, all founded the Canadian Club of Rome in 1970. The funding for the Limits to Growth research paper from MIT that put forth the notion that that the world should be managed by a managerial elite scientifically in order to reduce or keep control of population levels in conformity with certain ideas of mathematical limits to growth. That idea was funded by Canadian taxpayer money in 1971. And became infused into the Davos, into the World Economic Forum's operating systems in 1973. That's official. That's on their own records. So that same Maurice Strong that ran the national the Canadian oil plant policy, the national energy program of Canada under Pierre Elliott Trudeau. That was Maurice Strong, who was the co-founder of the Club of Rome with Michael Pitfield, who headed up CSIS. That same institution did something in 1970 to force a new policy that was designed to transform our world from being industrial, productive, based on the idea that there is morality in work, that thinking about the future is what should guide the behavior of economic planning and investment, into the idea of becoming a consumer society cult that would live for the moment without thinking of the past or the future. And that would always be based upon the idea of speculating increasingly to make money with non-existent assets. And so we could see the decline on one aspect of that as we began to outsource manufacturing to cheaper nations to use slave labor from poor countries that would feed our dollaramas instead of actually producing for ourselves. That was the necessary consequence of that plan, of that paradigm. And we could see the effects even in Europe, where that consistent decline in industry and the increase of a services economy became sort of the parasite, the cancer that took over. That's something which was never meant to be a viable economy. And we could see the effects of that in Windsor, Ontario, across the Rust Belt of the USA, where once productive areas had become consciously destroyed. You know, Hitler said there was a list of different cities in the world that Hitler had on his wish list to be destroyed in the context of a war with the West. Detroit was number 2. And we did to Detroit to ourselves what Hitler wanted to do, because it was recognized that this productive power that was located in these areas in the Midwest around the Great Lakes was such a productive power that it didn't just produce things for war. It could build railroads, it could build whatever with that machine tool capacity, and that's been sabotaged by, I would say, almost design, by getting people to think that economy is whatever that guy has in his head. That's not economy. That's always been a casino. That's always been a casino. That's not actually investing in something long term. That's looking at numbers and thinking about probability theory in the moment, but not about thinking about building something for the next generation. And what you have there on the left is something Carney himself participated in. As I mentioned, the guy, even though he's ideologically committed to a green global system of management, he is himself a former investment banker at Goldman Sachs that oversaw the growth of global derivatives and speculative financial instruments from the 1990s to the early 2000s before he became a civil servant. And that's the growth from 1998 of derivatives, fictitious instruments that are tied to like insurance on different types of security bundled, and how you could then gamble on the price of these. It's so detached from reality, it's ridiculous. But the growth of them, from the destruction of Glass-Steagall, the bank separation policies of 1999, all the way to the present collapse of 2008 and to the present today, they are now over 20 times the world GDP. This is not value, and this is what we're bailing out, and this is what Carney wants us to soon bail in with the next banking crisis. Now, I mentioned as well, Mark Carney is known since his days as the governor of the Bank of Canada to his running of the Financial Stability Board for the Bank of International Settlements. He's been known as the eco-warrior of central banks. He's proud of that title. Because he's already thinking about what is the new economy going to look like that is going to be the consequence of the collapse that he helped bring on. That's part of the idea. It's not an accident that this collapse has been built into the current operating system of the transatlantic banking structure. It was designed to collapse. It's doing exactly what it was supposed to do by destroying industry, by destroying the productive economy, right? And by creating jobs that were only designed to accommodate the creation, kind of like the Pygmalion effect, of a useless class. Because they want to justify the idea that there's too many of us for the world to support. We need things like MAID. We need things to get rid of the useless eaters based on some form of cost-cutting identity. Mark Carney as well, what is this? Some of his commitments and pledges have been to lower CO2 emissions by 50% of 1990 levels by the year 2030, net zero by 2050. Same thing for Europe. He wants to make cutting CO2 targets binding and enforceable by law. He promises that somehow creating $135 trillion of investments into renewables by this new economy that he believes can be brought online. And he has said in 2009, in his 50 Shades of Green, that climate disclosures must become comprehensive, climate risk management must be transformed, and sustainable investing must go mainstream. He then said the firms that anticipate these developments will be rewarded handsomely, and those that don't will cease to exist. He helped set up the Council for Inclusive Capitalism on that basis that integrated with the Vatican in 2021. That's Lynn Forrester de Rothschild right next to the recently deceased Pope, with the idea that, again, green values that are tied to degrowth. Activities like windmills should be rewarded by banks and insurance companies, but anything that encourages society to prosper, to actually grow physically, those have to be punished out of existence. And as I mentioned here, the bail-in regime, he is an architect of that same very thing. And this represents, like I said, not just something that came out of the blue with Carney. It's been a continuous policy since at least the 60s, maybe a little bit before that. And when I looked at where did the real bursts of progress come from in my research that was manifested in the form of my book series and many videos that my wife and I have been making, it happened when provinces got their act together and were able to take their rights into their own hands, utilizing certain things that are available, like Section 92 of the BNA Act. And I'm not a fan of the BNA Act. I think it had a geopolitical fraudulent character behind it. But at the same time, when people knew how to work it, they were able to utilize those powers in order to say, okay, we're going to act like a country. And whether it was in the Social Credit Party of W.A.C. Bennett in British Columbia, who was able to literally nationalize Power Corporation, a private company, which Maurice Strong also was a part of, in order to create BC Hydro, in order to justify the creation of things like the hydroelectric dams of the Peace River and the Upper Columbia River dams that created an economic renaissance for British Columbia. That was one example. That was a huge fight. The previous slide had an image of his plans for building rail lines to Alaska through the ABCY, the Alaska, British Columbia, Yukon conferences. That was one of the ways provinces were able to organize around the dampeners, the saboteurs of Ottawa during those years. And that was his plan on the right. That didn't happen. What we have is on the left. That did happen, but that was only phase one. Phase two involved continuing rail to access all sorts of resources, of which there are still in abundance, still no rail. The rail to Dease Lake is called the rail to nowhere. They were selling it for $1 because he was ousted. It was sabotaged, and his dream to actually connect to Alaska never happened. But it still is a possibility. Whether it happens throughout, I don't know if Carney is ever going to let this happen or what. But I mean, these are good ideas that gave rise to a lot. And just to get across, the reason why Quebec was able to have those bursts of industrial progress as well, and I go through this in volume 3 and 4 of The Untold History of Canada, is because British Columbia, W.A.C. Bennett gave a $100 million loan to Jean Lesage and the members of the l'Union Nationale Party that were able to then use that in order to invest in the James Bay project because they couldn't get any support and were being sabotaged by Ottawa the entire time. And because of that, they were able to create a situation where Quebec has a lot of energy independence, being 95% hydroelectric. There were plans to also have nuclear power, but that got sabotaged by people like Maurice Strong, who created a nuclear moratorium for Quebec, for Canada in 1980 as he was sabotaging Alberta energy independence. And these are some of the heroes of Quebec who died mysterious deaths, one after the other, who are all advancing this agenda. So I'll just say, for more information, there's a lot of books that I've written. There's a little book table at the Holmes family. It was nice stuff to set up and manage in the front of this facility. And I look forward to any conversations that we want to have. And by the way, I would say, I've got 30 seconds. Does this mean I believe that necessarily independence is the only way to go? Well, we might need that. And as Daniel Johnson Sr., who brought in Charles de Gaulle, said, l'indépendance est nécessaire, mais pas nécessairement l'indépendance. Independence if necessary, not necessarily independence, but if Ottawa becomes cooperative, then okay, sure, we'll stick with it. But if you're going to continue to sabotage, as I think Carney will, then independence it is, and we'll see. But that's my considerations up until now.
Two Quebecers dropping truth bombs back to back in one evening. Like, who spiked the maple syrup tonight? It's like the prairies turned into a confessional booth or something. Our next speaker, I think, is well known, CEO of Alberta Prosperity Project and organizer of the referendum initiative. Our next speaker will outline how the process aligns with the Federal Clarity Act and why Albertans must have the democratic right to decide their future. Please welcome Mitch Sylvester.
Hello, everybody. Hello. How's everybody tonight? Well, I'm telling you, I'm a little bit overwhelmed and actually a little bit embarrassed for what I'm hearing. It surprises me that I was naive enough my whole life to think that Canada was actually working with us. I mean, really. All right. Alberta Prosperity Project is actually what its name intends us to be. We want us to be prosperous. However, we're seeing in live time that that's almost impossible based on what's happening to stop that from happening. I mean, never in my lifetime, as naive as I'm finding out that I am, would I have thought that our federal government would be working against us consciously to hurt our industry. Who would have believed that? Not me, for sure. And now I understand that after April 28th, I had an epiphany. Up until that point, I was an independent Alberta within Canada person thinking that that was actually a possibility. I no longer believe that. And the more information I get, the more and more I believe that there's only one path to this. How can we control all of that stuff that they're talking about out there from here? What choice do we have but to go along with what's happening? We have to localize. We can't deal with that geopolitical stuff because there's no way for us to do it. And understand this. This is their attitude towards us. I've always, since I started this 3 years ago, been wondering who they were. You ever wonder who they are? Well, we know one thing about them. They don't like us, right? Understand, they don't like us. So they're telling us that. We'll screw the West. We'll take the rest. And, of course, us being us, we'll say, well, let the Eastern bastards freeze in the dark. And that's kind of our attitude. And so there's been friction between the East and the West for the whole time. Now, we're talking about them taking advantage of Alberta. Alberta is its own deal. Alberta produces a lot, but however, let's look and see how they treat Alberta. Now, Alberta's net contribution to Ottawa, as far as the numbers are concerned, is quite a bit larger than everybody else's, as you can see. They obviously need our money. Look at Quebec at the other end. Benoit identified lots of things that they did very well, but look at the differences. And Quebec's not a have-not province. Quebec's not a have-not province. But understand that the goal of that is to do exactly what they wanted to do, is to keep us poor. Confederation is working exactly the way they want it to work. So on April 28th, when we lost that election, I'm not going to lie to you, I was hoping Pierre was going to win. And I saw that little thing where they pulled him out of there. And it would have made my life quite a bit easier. But it made me realize that something is absolutely true. There is absolutely nothing that we can do unless we do it ourselves. We can't rely on the politician to do it for us. So we're at the stage right now where we're going to make probably the most important, most critical decision, political decision we'll ever make. And it's going to have to be made in the next very short little while here. Canada pension, you will get your pension no matter what happens here. If Alberta leaves Confederation, you will get your pension. Your pension has a portability clause. It's going to follow you wherever you go. And you're also entitled to have more than one passport, so you will retain your Canadian passport. That's two of the big arguments that I hear against an independence Alberta. My question to you is, we have $350 billion, according to the LifeWorks report, in a fund. Why has the Premier not called that back to Alberta? Understand, we're $100 billion in debt. She could just call that back. That's in the CPP Act. The CPP Act says that the Premier can call back the excess contribution that the province makes, and she can call it back with interest anytime she chooses. Now, there's a $350 billion asset there, and the province is $100 billion in debt. What is stopping our government from actually being proactive and making us more independent by doing that very little thing? What's stopping our government from collecting our own taxes? And these are things that are simple as far as I'm personally concerned. Last year, I had the opportunity to have a conversation with the Premier and about the Bill of Rights. And I said, well, you know, Premier, honestly, the grassroots people are not very pleased. And she says, why is everybody so angry? I said, because you're not doing a lot of things that seem to be very easy and things that would benefit Alberta that, as far as we're concerned, are no-brainers. And that's her own words on Alberta pension. Alberta pension is a no-brainer. She consciously said that. Now, she's been standing up to Trudeau, and I admire her in many ways, but Trudeau is an easy target. And what I'm seeing is that now that Pierre has lost this election, I believe that our Premier and our government of Alberta was pinning their hopes on the fact that Pierre would win, and then we'd have pipelines going in every direction. I would personally have 2014 gun laws, and everything would be back to normal for a while. But these people are consciously working against us every single day, and we're not like that. We've got elbows up for Canada, but Canada doesn't have elbows up for Alberta. And that's absolutely the way I see it. Now, this is a transfer payment, $13.6 billion to Quebec. Next year, it's the same thing, never changes. We give them $27 billion in 13 months, and we're running deficit budgets. How does that make any sense? It's not fair. And if you're looking at fairness, this is not fair. It's a conscious thing made to make us poorer. Now, let's please understand that. I know it's hard to understand that the government of Canada is actually working against us, and never in my wildest dreams would I have thought that they're consciously trying to hurt our economy. Danielle said they are sabotaging our economy, actually, and that's a quote. In his book, Values, our new Prime Minister said that Western society is morally rotten and it has been corrupted by capitalism, which has brought about a climate emergency. And this, he claims, requires rigid controls on personal freedom, industry, and corporate funding. Assets will be stranded, used gasoline-powered cars will be unsaleable. Now, just understand, how is that not the front page headline of every newspaper in Canada for 2 months before the election? That's flat out communism. That's what that is. And he's telling us that that's what he's going to do to us. And they're also discussing right now no more gas-powered vehicles in Canada by 2035. So what is that going to mean for you? They don't work here. You can't go anywhere. You imagine the infrastructure that's going to have to change to accommodate that? That's 10 years away. Every gas station is going to be no good. They're going to have to replace that with plug-ins. We do not have the infrastructure to plug in every car in Alberta. It's just not possible. So if they continue down that path, you're going to be stuck in your little area. Didn't they predict this? You will own nothing and be happy? My wife said something to me that I would never have thought of in my life. She said, you know, Mitch, there are people out there that will own nothing and be happy, just not us. So just saying. And it never dawned on me, not for 1 minute. All right, Brookfield. Brookfield has interests in electric cars. They have interests in carbon capture. They have interests in all the things that they're pushing on us. So understand that used to be against the rules. Understand this, they have no rules. And that's why we can't fix this relationship, because they have no rules. If you're going to take one single thing, they are above the law. Did we elect kings or tyrants? We did not elect those people. That's not what we elected them to be. But since they have no rules, that's exactly what they are. And that's why it cannot be fixed. Right there. If they would live by the laws of the land and common laws, if they hurt people, if they steal money, if they do all that kind of stuff, and they would be held culpable for it, then we could have it. Understand what's at stake here. This is the richest piece of real estate in the world. Europe does not have the resources that we have here. Do you think it's coincidence that Europe is coveting Alberta and Canada? It's not a coincidence at all, not anymore. China does not have the resources and riches that we have. We have enough oil in the ground to pay the entire US debt right here in Alberta. Just understand how valuable this is. And understand that right now we have a path to actually take advantage of that and change what's going to happen nationally by nationalizing, by becoming independent ourselves and using it to live the lives that we thought we were actually living the whole way, all the way along. When I became premier, the premier said this to me. I thought I would fix everything in 6 or 7 months, but everything is broken. That means it cannot be fixed. At that level, when the Premier of Alberta said everything's broken, that means to me that it's too corrupt to fix. That's exactly what that means. So that is our biggest problem right there. That's alluding to the fact that we have these elected people that have no rules and do whatever they want. And we've seen it over and over again, and I'm going to illustrate that here as much as I can. Senator Plett in the middle spends an hour talking to you about liberal corruption. Ethics violations is what they call them. That's the term for crimes. 82 ethics violations where they steal hundreds of millions of dollars and billions of dollars from us with no consequence. So if that's the case, we just re-elected the very same cabinet that the Liberals have had in power for the last 10 years with a more effective leader. Does that not concern you? And moving forward, how much concern, what is going to actually happen? Look what they're already doing. Electric cars, 5% GDP to Europe. Why would we be sending that to Europe? The Americans have been talking to us about 2 or 3% GDP forever. Today, they announced a 5% GDP to them in Europe. That's a long ways from Alberta. The Davidson report. Let's talk about that. Nobody wants to look into that. That's a faux pas. We can't talk about that kind of stuff because, you know, the government did not hurt us during COVID, right? It was a test. COVID was a test. They wanted to test to see how far they could push us. Danielle said, if they don't do this, 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 and this, it's going to affect national unity. And now we're talking about that very thing. We're talking about affecting national unity. That's us. So if we don't stand up and have a group like Alberta Prosperity Project that will threaten national unity, she hasn't got a stick, right? But the only thing with that is that we have to threaten and even mean it. And that's the real thing that has to come out of this. Everybody has to understand how deathly serious we are. Let's not ignore the last 10 years. I'll help you remember. All government ministers admit COVID restrictions are all about political power and control, not about stopping infection and transmission. Let's talk about censorship. I'm old enough to remember that censorship was something that we never ever thought would happen in Alberta or Canada. Remember this, you don't know what you don't know. And remember this, the people that are going to be hurt the most by censorship is your children, because they're going to be indoctrinating your children and they're going to be giving them the information that they actually want them to have, and that is who is going to be hurt the most on this. And C-293, you know what that is? They're attacking all of our industries. They are going to pass a bill that is going to allow them to go to your farm, seize your land, and seize your herd. Why? How can they give themselves that kind of power? Does it make sense to anybody in the room? All it does is it's going to give them control and the ability to hurt our industry. Another example right here. Canada gets hit with a retaliatory tariff on canola. We put 100% tariff on a Chinese electrical car that nobody knows what the hell it is. So they could turn around and canola and put a tariff on our canola, our peas, our pork, and our seafood, which costs you more money. And it was the intent of it. The intent of it is to hurt you and make you poorer. Plain and simple. There's no other way to explain that. Oil. They're sabotaging our oil industry. Everybody else in the world is producing more oil except us. Bills unique to Alberta. Pipeline bans, tanker bans, oil and gas investment. Everybody says we're landlocked. We're not landlocked, we're policy locked. We're policy locked. Without the government regulations that they have currently in place, Alberta could put a tariff on every train going east to west in the country, and we could negotiate our own pipelines through BC. That's all there is to it. Right now, we can't do it because federal rules don't allow it. $500 billion in lost investment in Alberta. That's a lot of money. That creates a lot of jobs. But that's not the purpose. Trudeau said, that's not in our plan, right? Germany tried to buy natural gas. Japan tried to buy natural gas. Greece tried to buy natural gas. What did Pierce? Not Pierre, that's just Freudian slip. Justin, what did he say? He said, no, that's not in our plan. Do you know why? Because it would have created sustainable employment that would have gone year after year after year, and wealth that would have gone on year after year after year. And what they're doing is they're putting carbon capture in, which Brookfield has money invested in. And the carbon capture is going to pull the CO2 out of the air that they can't measure. And then it's going to stick it in the ground, which also can't measure. And there's absolutely, they're going to pay themselves $50 billion of our money to do it. All right, that's the refinery I was just talking about. All right, here's where the rubber meets the road. That's where Norway is. Norway came to Alberta to study our oil patch. They have $1.3 trillion in an oil fund. That's a decision that you have to make right now. You have to understand that this is what you're choosing. You're choosing a future for Alberta that will have that kind of oil reserve money available to us, or we're going to go another 25 years and we're going to end up with that. Because that's the choices we're making. We're talking money here. This is a money talk. They're taking our money away from us. They're spending our money. We don't know who they are. We don't even like them, and we're letting them do it. And that's not all. They're capping the industry. So not only are they stopping the production, they're killing the cow. Again, what's the purpose? To make you poorer. That is all it could possibly be. There's no other reason for it. Here's one of my favorite slides. Carbon taxes cost Canadians billions of dollars over 5 years, hurting the economy while reducing CO2 emissions by 11.9 gigatons. China emits 11.9 gigatons of CO2 every day and a half. Okay? And they increase their CO2 production by 10% every year. Oh, and then the fires. Just understand that most of them are man-caused by people. Manitoba confirms 100 out of 111 are confirmed, said by people, not climate change. Here's my favorite slide. This is the taxes we pay. Carbon tax, personal income tax, corporate income tax, goods and services tax, excise taxes, fuel excise tax, alcohol excise duty, tobacco excise duty, cannabis excise duty, customs duties, air travelers tax, luxury tax, provincial territorial tax, capital gains tax, land transfer tax, media tax, regulation tax, CPP tax, business tax, estate tax, and now they want to tax your homes that are paid for. Do you understand how estate tax works? If you pay If your parents paid $200,000 for a home and they die, and the home is worth $1 million, you pay 65% tax on the difference, on the 800,000. 65%. How's that work? Just understand that, 65% on the difference. So what's the purpose of that? They don't want you to transfer your wealth down to your kids. That's plain and simple what it is. That's all it is. In a free and independent Alberta, we're talking about a business plan. We could talk about a flat 12% tax for everybody. That would, you wouldn't have to pay any income tax, consumption tax of 12%. And when they do give us money, they give it to all these people, all corrupt nations. I'm going to go by a couple slides. Okay, let's look at this. One more thing on the money. Audit of $187 billion worth of Liberal infrastructure fund finds 20,000 missing projects. So they're also stealing it. And that's part of the fact that what we're discussing, that there is no accountability for these people. They didn't even look into it. Mark Carney said, we've had an election. Don't worry about that stuff that happened last year and the year before. Don't worry about it. That's the way it works. Here's the last thing I'm going to talk to you about. Doug Ford had his house broken into when he was in it. Now he's all about guns. You should be allowed to shoot criminals who break into your home, right? Attaboy, I love that. Here's the way the communists look at guns. All political power comes from the barrel of a gun. The Communist Party must command all the guns. That way no guns can ever be used to command the party. So they're actually chasing you down for your guns. They've got a minister that's going to come to your homes and get your guns. And this is the way, I'm going to finish with this. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state and the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And that is the way we're going to run the new Alberta. Thank you very much.
Nobody can see me while I'm in the back. I've been sitting trying my best. I'm no comedian. I was trying to find a joke of two Quebecers, and I was like, is Mitch Northern Albertan? Is he a gunslinger? You know, he's got a bunch of different things. I just can't make it. So I have to leave you on that. I'm like, somewhere there is a joke, and some better host has it. But there is a joke there with two Quebecers followed by Mitch. I'm like, who designed this lineup? This is gold. Anyways. We're going to pass the boot, and I was trying to work that into. I'm like, and then we're going to pass the boot. This is amazing. We're going to ask the ushers, I assume, somewhere out there. They're going to come up. Money goes in the boot. Obviously, it's not free to pull, together an event like this. And if you got it in your heart to give a little bit of money, they would appreciate that. And so the boot is, I think, coming around, or it's not a physical boot. Well, I'm a little disappointed. The clock has started to tick. You got 10 minutes, and then we'll start up with our final four speakers.
So that's the upcoming schedule. We have Chris Sims from the Canadian Taxpayer Federation, Bruce Parity, who is a professor of law, I believe, at where is he a professor of law at? See, I should have had my notes already ahead of you guys. That's okay. Queen's University. We got Peter McCaffrey from the Alberta Institute, and of course, Jeff Rath, also from the Alberta Prosperity Project, as well as just a big vocal proponent of Alberta independence. So that's kind of what we're doing. I'm not going to sit here and just keep gabbing for about 10 minutes. What I wanted to say is that we've been doing APP events in and around Alberta, well, essentially probably since 2021-ish, 2022 for sure. And this last group of people that have been going out and talking have been really Mitch Sylvester, who you just heard, Jeff Rath, who will be bringing up right away, but Dr. Dennis Moudry, who of course is one of the founders of the Alberta Prosperity Project, and also another really good friend of ours, Tanner Naday, who is an economist. And we were at the event last night in Calgary. And what I would like to do is, rather than just sitting around doing nothing for 10 minutes, well, granted, I'm going to go make popcorn, but for just sitting around for 10 minutes, I'm going to show you what Tanner talked about last night. So if you want, stick around for that. He talks for about 20 minutes. I know we only have about a 10-minute break, but definitely worth listening to. And with that, I'm going to bring Tanner up on the stage.
You mentioned Lloydminster, Alberta. Me and my wife live there. And out of Lloydminster, I run a very small economic consulting company, Tanner Naday Incorporated. I also run Tanner Naday, a website and so on, social media pages, etc. I graduated from the University of Calgary back in 2020, right when the lockdown started, which meant, of course, there weren't a lot of jobs available for anybody. So I was driving truck, hauling grain, and as I was doing so, I thought it important to start a few social media pages in which I would take the happenings of the day and I would comment on them from an economic perspective. And the Lord has blessed that and has now allowed me to tour around the province talking about these various economic issues. And finally, I am now acquiring my Master's of Theology. That's been so much fun. And lately, as Nicole mentioned, I have been traveling with her and Mitch and others, talking about pension plans and various other pressing topics in Alberta. But I'm not going to talk to you about pension plans tonight. That is not my intention. That is not my topic. No, instead, I want to talk to you about something different. Because as you know, to be entirely honest, as everyone knows, Alberta is an economic juggernaut. Alberta is an economic juggernaut. Just last year, our GDP was about $353 billion, with a B, dollars. And that equals about $71,000 per person per capita, which is the highest among the 10 provinces. None of the provinces are as high as Alberta in this metric. It's true that Ontario produces some $876 billion worth of GDP every year, but when you look at it from a per capita perspective, Ontario's GDP is in the middle 50,000s, $54-ish thousand per capita. So it's nowhere near as high as Alberta. We are an economic juggernaut. And of that $353 billion that we produce, we export a lot of it. We ship a lot of those goods out of the province. Internationally, Alberta ships about $183 billion every single year out of the province and into international markets. Provincially and across Canada, we export some $76-ish billion. We export a lot of goods across Canada as well, 76-ish billion. And of course, we import tens of billions of dollars as well every single year from other provinces and other countries around the world. So in a word or a few words, trade is critical. Trade is critical to the health of our province. It's critical to the health of our nation, for that matter. And if an independent Alberta were to suffer great restrictions on its trade, and therefore, if an independent Alberta were to see a restriction on its economic output, on its exports and imports, the quality of life in Alberta would go down, and perhaps independence is not worth pursuing. You see, when you go online, or when you talk to your neighbors at coffee or what might have you, you will very often hear this argument. Here is the argument you will hear. An independent Alberta is an impossible Alberta. It is an Alberta that cannot exist. And the reason it cannot exist is because an independent Alberta would be a landlocked Alberta. And if Alberta were landlocked, we couldn't trade as we are right now, and so we wouldn't be able to experience the economic quality of life that we have right now. It would be worse for us in an independent Alberta rather than better for us. That is the topic I want to talk to you about tonight. Landlocking in an independent Alberta. Because you see, here is my fear, here is my concern. We hear all the time how this independent Alberta is an impossible Alberta because it would be a landlocked Alberta. They say we'd be landlocked outside of Confederation. But what those commentators and critics so often neglect to mention is that Alberta within Canada, Alberta right now, is landlocked. We don't have a port on our left side, not immediately. We don't have a port on our right side or our north side or our south side, not as it stands right now. You see, you might be expecting me to stand up here tonight as a proponent of independence, which I am, and argue the position that, oh no, in Alberta, an independent Alberta wouldn't be landlocked. No, that wouldn't be the case. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to approach this topic in an unorthodox way. I'm actually going to concede the point. I'm going to say, yes, actually, an independent Alberta would be landlocked. Look at the geography of our nation, of our province. Look at the geography of Alberta right now. There's no port on our left, or our right, or our top or bottom. Nope, we're surrounded by land. And that's the way it stands right now. And unless something seriously changes in the future, that's the way it's going to be in the future. So to argue that an independent Alberta could not exist because it would be landlocked is a non sequitur. Alberta's already landlocked right now. You see, the question is not, therefore, would an independent Alberta be landlocked? No, we're already landlocked. The question really is, considering that Alberta is landlocked and is going to be landlocked, what is the best way to navigate that landlocking? How can we best maneuver around this geographical position which has been dealt to us? How can we best negotiate and maneuver around Alberta's landlocking problem? Here's one such way. You can trade with America. You see, we're going to examine tonight whether it's better to navigate landlocking within Canada or outside Canada. And one of the ways to do so is to trade with your neighbors to the south. You see, I told you that right now, $183 billion of Alberta goods are exported every year internationally, which is true. What I did not tell you yet is that about 90% of those goods go south. They go to our border, or they go, to our neighbors down south. They go to America. That is where the overwhelming amount of our international trade flows. It doesn't flow east, it doesn't flow west, it flows south to America. This is one such way that you can navigate the landlocking problem. You don't have to go to port. We can just ship the goods on the roads, on the trains, down they go. Ideally, you ship a lot of those goods on pipeline, but nevertheless, down they go, all the way south. But I want to draw to your attention now a point that's critical to understand. It is not as though, with these dealings with the Americans, within Confederation right now, that Alberta has jurisdiction to negotiate treaties, trade treaties, with America. That is not given to us. That is not given to us under the Constitution. Instead, Section 91, 2, and Section 132 vest that power with Ottawa. International treaties, so trade treaties between Alberta, or Canada at least, and America, are governed and negotiated by Ottawa. So it might be, as it is right now,
to come out tonight from the UCP. That's MLA from Lacombe, Ponoka, Jennifer Johnson. I don't know about anybody else, but, when it's a UCP ran event, I hope there's, I'm not greedy. I'd take 10. I'd take 10 not 40. I'd take 10. So the fact we got one brave enough to come, my hat's off to you, Jennifer, as she's been to every single one they've done. Now, the next speaker reminds me often, with politicians, that you got to reward them when they're doing good things. And so I see you sitting there, and I'm sure at times it can't be an easy seat to sit when the rest don't show. So that's if you're sitting in different constituencies, maybe remind them it isn't such a terrible thing to listen to a conversation. Our next speaker is the Alberta Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, and she will discuss what would Alberta's finances look like if they were managed solely by and for Albertans. What public investments could be prioritized, healthcare, education, sustainable energy. Please welcome to the stage, Chris Sims.
Well, hello. Is this thing on? Wonderful. Can you hear me in the back? Great. Thank you so much for coming out. As my dear friend Sean just mentioned, my name is Chris Sims. I'm the Alberta Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. My dear friend Franco Terrazzano is actually in the audience, if you want to go say hi as well, along with my daughter. I see a few of our CTF t-shirts in the crowd here as well. So thank you so much for being so passionate that you will come out on a rainy evening and talk about things like sovereignty, freedom, finances, taxes, and government. We need folks to actually get out there and do the work and understand this stuff, because then they need to tell 10 friends. They need to get their friends and neighbors involved in accountable government. Now, I was raised in rural Western Canada. I am a rural Western Canadian girl, and I always had a dream of being a journalist. And when I was in my early 20s, just after I got married in Hope, British Columbia, my husband and I moved to a magical land called Ottawa. And I started working in the Parliamentary Press Gallery, and it was right in the mix. I used to check the time by looking at the Peace Tower outside on the Parliament buildings. That's how in the thick of it we were at the time. And you know what? I spoke with so many people back in the day who were from what I would call the Laurentians. They were from the corridor that runs from Quebec City down to Windsor. And I really believed that it was my responsibility to represent rural Western Canada. And if only I would explain myself and my brothers and my cousins and all of the folks in my family, that we would have a meeting of the minds. I truly believed that. And I thought it was really important. So much so that I had a subscription to Western Standard magazine. True story. I had it stacked on my desk at the CTV Parliamentary Bureau, in earnest, because I thought it was important to fly the flag of things like oil and gas and smaller, more accountable government, having referendums, right? Recall legislation, that good old prairie populism that I believed in so much. And I thought that folks were listening, but I understand the frustration of feeling that we aren't being listened to. What I want to talk about, though, is about the brass tacks and the numbers here in Alberta, because including my own experience, I'm going to say something that is hard to hear. It's easy to get mad at Ottawa. Let's admit it, it's super easy to get really proud of ourselves out here and our hard work and rail against those Eastern bastards in Ottawa. Let them freeze in the dark. I hear that. And cards on the table, I'm a big fan of Premier Danielle Smith. Known her for a long time. We were both in radio. I like the way that she works. But in order to have a fortress here in Alberta, we have to be fiscally sound. We have to be strong here at home. In a recent Calgary Sun article, I compared her actually to Sarah Connor from the movie Terminator 2. Anybody who follows me online, and poor Franco's heard this speech so many times, he's sick of hearing it. My favorite movies are the first two Terminator movies because we see Sarah Connor go from this fragile, vulnerable mother who's frightened of her own shadow and doesn't know how to balance her checkbook into this warrior in the second one. We find out where she is. She's locked up. What's she doing? She's sitting there crying? No, she's doing pull-ups. So she's ready for the fight. So the question is, what would have happened if when time came to save the world, they went to that bunker and they opened up the door and there was nothing in it? No minigun for Arnie, no supplies. You're not ready to go. And this is where I want to come back to Fortress Alberta. What's our spending situation like here? How much would it cost for us to be a country instead of a province? So I wanted to give you some numbers of where we're at here in the province of Alberta. Right now, our provincial debt is more than $82 billion. It is going up, not down. That's a bad thing. They're borrowing more than $5 billion extra dollars in this fiscal year right now. The latest budget they gave us, we are more than $5 billion in deficit. That's, again, not okay. Why? Because we pay interest on that thing every year. It's the same as if you had a credit card or a line of credit. There isn't some magical free money that the government can just use for its debt. No, all of us taxpayers here in Alberta are paying the interest on that debt. It's close to $3 billion just this year. To give you an idea, that's more than what we're spending on public safety and emergency preparedness. The debt interest cost here in Alberta, that cost is more than what we're spending on emergency services. It is eye-watering. I'll give you another point. Debt interest costs, if we go back one generation, okay, I'm dating myself, but I graduated in the mid-1990s, okay? Spice Girls were just coming on the scene. It was a big deal, okay? Canadian Taxpayers Federation is already out there, though, because we started back in 1990. So picture yourself, mid-1990s. That's when the Taxpayers Federation started saying, you know, we need to have balanced budgets and you need to keep your spending in line. Keep your spending increases at the rate of inflation plus population growth, or less. That would be great, but keep it reined in, okay? Our debt interest costs that we have incurred since that time in 1997, $34 billion. This is Alberta. It's got nothing to do with Ottawa, okay? If we had restrained spending, this is a big one, and I want you to kind of mentally prepare for it because this number is so big. If the Alberta government had started restraining spending, not cutting it, just increasing by the rate of inflation plus population growth back in the mid-90s, we would have saved $300 billion. Picture 300 brand new hospitals. Picture them down the street, all 300, burning to the ground. That's only because they weren't restraining spending. And before you start thinking, oh, that must have been just during the NDP times of Rachel Notley, I'm sorry, no, that's not true. Because they doubled program spending between 2004 and 2015. That was a PC government. It went up 103%. So Ralph Klein holds up the sign, paid in full, off to the races, everybody's happy. Very shortly after that, we started going back into the red, real deep, and we kept going. One of my friends liked saying, oh, they were spending like drunken sailors. A drunken sailor was the best man at my wedding, okay? And Byron was way better with money than the government is. So they were spending like politicians who were unrestrained. That was the situation that we're in now, which brings me back to the government right now. The good things they're doing, they made good on their income tax cut promise. That was awesome. And very importantly, and to my point on that spending restraint, they strengthened the Taxpayer Protection Act so that if they want to hike taxes, we all get to vote on that first. Okay? The second part is they promised to keep spending increases below the rate of inflation plus population growth. That's very good, as long as they stick to it. And that's the catch. In the last budget, because we had so many people move to Alberta, the population growth part of that equation was really high. And so the government spending went really high. They just barely stayed within their own law. Like, that was so thin you could see through it. So this is why at the Taxpayers Federation, we're warning them of, hey, get your own house in order, make sure you have a balanced budget, make sure you are not piling onto the debt, because we're all going to pay for it. Shifting our focus to our favorite topic of Ottawa, okay? Let's look at how much money Alberta has been out, really, because of Ottawa's behavior. So if you take a look at the Parliamentary Budget Officer's report, he is saying that the cap on energy is going to blow a $20 billion hole in the Canadian economy. He's saying that it's going to cost 40,000 jobs, okay? Here's a big one. Canada saw nearly $670 billion fly away since 2015, since Trudeau was elected. $670 billion gone because of either stalled or canceled natural resource projects. I wanted to do another mental picture here for you. Combine the energy cap cost, $20 billion, with the $670 billion mark, right? Where they're choking off resources. We're about $690 billion. To give you an idea of how much money that is the income taxes for the entire populations of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba combined for 10 years. And that's just not the taxpayers. Just for math's sake, we had to do the populations. We know that infants don't pay taxes. The entire populations of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba's federal income tax bills, 10 years. That's how much this has been strangled and thwarted. And so this is where we come into this thing like with equalization and how much this is costing us. So a lot of folks often mention that equalization has cost Alberta around $67 billion since the 1950s. As my friend Franco Terrazzano points out, equalization is just one funding stream. That's just one of them. When you consider all of the money the feds tax and spend, Albertans have paid more than $600 billion more to Ottawa than it's gotten back since 1961. I know, it's really hard to picture. The best way, the rule of thumb, is that a new hospital, with inflation, it's probably a little bit more now, but you get the picture. A new smallish hospital costs about $1 billion to build. So lights, copper wire, fence, all that stuff, picture it, about $1 billion. So the next time you hear somebody say, oh, it just cost $1 billion, or this is how much it was expensed, picture a hospital burning down. That is how much money we're losing in that situation. And so going forward, if folks truly want to try to go out on their own, right, and say, we're going to be a country, we're going to be Alberta or Buffalo or whatever it is, we have to start thinking about a couple of things. How much will we be able to actually balance our own books? Like, how strong is our Fortress Alberta, considering what I just mentioned to you, that it doesn't matter what color the jersey is of the government. If the blue guys are in, the blue guys can blow money too, just like the orange and red ones. And everybody has to hold them accountable. That politics is not just a team sport where we just rah no matter what our politicians are doing. We have to hold them to account and make sure they're doing the right things, because otherwise we all pay for it. So, do we have good fiscal management here in Alberta? We just did a fiscal report card of all the finance ministers. Alberta came in second because they're doing a pretty good job. They got a B because they delivered on that income tax cut. We've got a great taxpayer protection plan. They are saving money in the Heritage Fund. There's a lot of good things going on there. But it's a yellow light of caution, adding money to the debt, because we can't afford it. So with that in mind, if we were our own country, if Alberta were its own country, quite often, if we said, okay, that's it, I'm out of here. I'm tired of being abused by you. I'm not taking your crap anymore. I'm packing my bags and I'm out of here. Gone. Okay. But in divorce proceedings, it's usually the higher income earning spouse that keeps paying more after the divorce because the other spouse is determined to have a certain level of lifestyle that you've been accustomed to. And the judge says, guess what? Yeah, I know you've been making most of the money, you've been paying most of the bills, and you're gonna keep on doing that. So we have to kind of keep that in mind of, would that be a clean break? How long would those legal entanglements last? How much would they cost? Would there be any way for them to come back after Alberta taxpayers in order to get reparations for, the dependent Maritimes? Picture them as our children, right? We're having a falling out with our husband in Ontario or our wife in Ontario, and now the kids in the Maritimes, they need braces, right? So they're coming to us for more money. Would that happen? We have to keep that in mind. Also, there are entire departments, right, that cost money. How much would Alberta's national defense cost? Would we be building jets here? I don't imagine we're building a lot of boats, but would we be building jets here? Border security. Would we be setting up border crossing booths? Like, I don't quite know where you'd put them. Would you put them on all the gravel roads between Alberta and Saskatchewan? If Saskatchewan's coming, are we going to put them on the Manitoba border? Will we make Manitoba pay for them? We don't know, right? How much is that all going to cost? So those are some of the things that I think it's important that we keep in mind going forward. No matter where we are in separation, the Taxpayers Federation, we're a national organization, so we bring you the numbers. We tell you how much things cost and where we're at as far as these things go. So going forward, ask yourselves things like, how much will it cost for us to have a national defense? How much will it cost for us to have borders? There's other great organizations that have done super deep dives on pensions. How much is that going to cost? Are they really going to let us take a certain percentage out of the Canada Pension Plan? And then also comes the question of debt. So we just had the Teddy Waste Awards last night with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, and former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau won the Lifetime Achievement Award. I mean, he worked really hard for it. I mean, there was a lot of material there. So he actually managed to double the debt in less than 10 years. And again, picture that. It's so easy to say, it takes like 4 seconds. But picture all of the governments, from Sir John A. Macdonald to Laurier to, Mackenzie King and Diefenbaker and the first Trudeau and Harper. Picture all of the world wars. Picture the Great Depression. Picture all those downturns. Add up all of those governments' debts. Double them. He doubled them. And before anybody says, oh, well, there is a global pandemic, what was he to do? He doesn't think about monetary policy. Let up. No, he was spending like a reckless politician before the lockdowns. In 2018, 2019, thereabouts, he spent more, his government spent more in that one fiscal year before COVID than any 1 year of the Second World War, adjusted for population and inflation. So picture it, like the Soviets weren't parachuting into the schoolyard, okay? Like nothing crazy was happening. There was no tsunami. This is 2018, 2019. They still managed to spend more than during the war. It was wild what that government was doing. And so we now have a debt that is more than $1.2 trillion. I told you about the hospital and the $1 billion. We're going through that hospital one a week. We're spending about $1 billion a week on interest payments on the national debt. So the question is Ottawa going to say, okay, here's your portion that you get to take? And what's that number going to look like? So we're going to need some serious bean counters with some great Excel spreadsheet experience going forward before this party gets started. Thank you so much. left you.
You did leave me time.
80 seconds I left.
And I still disagree with you on one thing. Screw Ottawa. I'm done with it. You're not convincing me to play nice, Chris Sims. Please welcome to the stage Professor of Law at Queen's University and author of the Alberta Declaration of Independence. He raises tough questions about government accountability, democracy, legitimacy, and the bloated bureaucracies that can overshadow public needs. Please welcome to the stage Professor Bruce Pardy.
Oh, is this on? All right. You can hear me? You can't hear me or no? Yes. All right. I'm the interloper from Ontario. Inside your hearts, there is a Canada that you know and love. The true north, strong and free. A land of opportunity where everyone has a chance. Where people prosper by their own initiative and hard work. A compassionate country where no one gets left behind. Of institutions working for the good of the people. And above all else, a free country. A country governed by the rule of law, which our soldiers have fought to protect and preserve. This is the country to which you have been loyal, flown its flag, cheered on at the Olympics and on the ice. The country which you may have served and sacrificed for. The past 5 years have revealed an ugly truth. Now, it was apparent before that, but our disbelief got in the way. This Canada that you thought that you lived in, does not actually exist. There are two Canadas. The one we love is imaginary. And the other one is all too real. What is the real one? In 1775, George Washington wrote to the inhabitants of Canada, as it then was, and invited them to join the Americans in their revolution, to reject the rule of the British king. Come then, my brethren, Washington wrote, let us run together to the same goal. We have taken up arms in defense of our liberty. We look forward with pleasure to that day, not far remote, we hope, when we will be the inhabitants of America and have one sentiment and the full enjoyment of the blessings of a free government. The Canadians said no. They wanted to be subjects of the crown. America's foundational idea is liberty. Canada's is deference to authority. and Canadians are subject still. Now, the king is just a figurehead, but the crown still rules. Under our Westminster system of government, the same small group of people command the executive and the legislature, appoint people to the Senate and judges to our highest courts. The crown owns the territory, while people and property rest beneath its benevolent hand. Its public authorities tell you what to do, and the people obey. But this is just the half of it. The real Canada is not just capitulation to authority. Canada is also a grift. It has always been a grift. As my Energy Probe colleague Lawrence Solomon has put it, Canada's colonies came together not for some grand vision of a free and noble country, but for subsidies and grants from the central government. The British North America Act reads like it was written by accountants, not by visionaries or statesmen. Grift is not an aberration. It's part of the design of Confederation. It's not the true North, strong and free. It's a cartel held together by bribes. Now, I don't need to tell you that in the Canada of today, the grift is everywhere. Government contracts to politically friendly firms, banks, one of the biggest grifts of all. Crown corporations, Aboriginal communities, Quebec, yes, the whole damn province. Newfoundland, persuaded to join Confederation, not for the liberty, but for the unemployment insurance payments. Government programs for this and that and the next thing. Universities, public servants, politicians and their pensions, protected industries. And the list goes on and on. Everywhere you look, someone is on the take. The main exception, the taxpayers of Alberta. Right. Pyramid schemes, in order to work, have to have someone paying in at the bottom. That would be you. Don't be surprised. Do not be surprised. This is the way it was built. The real Canada is a beleaguered, corrupt, and managed country. It's in retreat, more interested in redistribution than in production, more resolved to administer than to build. Abandoned freedom for the appearance of safety. Its elites collaborate with foreign powers and global institutions, sacrifice the interests of its people, and plunder the country for what remains of its prosperity. Now, those who aspire to build a sovereign Alberta inside a united Canada are thinking of the Canada that exists only inside their heads. This Canada, they think, can be reformed with reasonable dialogue and rational problem solving. It can be fixed, they think, because it still rests on the pillars of Western civilization, the rule of law, private property, free markets, merit, equal protection, limited government, and so on and so forth. That Canada is a figment of their imagination. In the real Canada, our country's most powerful institutions, governments, legislatures, bureaucracies, and courts have made Canada into a managerial society. This Canada is not united, it is not reasonable, and it is not rational. It is planned and directed. It is progressive and socialist. And it is pathologically self-destructive. The people are managed. They are directed, influenced, regulated, supervised. What kind of cars to drive, how to carry their groceries, what medications to take, what to think, how to speak, who to hire, taxed at work, at home, at the pump, at the store, so that their money can be sent elsewhere. The problem is not just bad policy. This is national character. This is baked into the Constitution. The real Canada cannot fundamentally reform. And yet, Alberta might, just might, be able to save Canada. You do that by leaving it. Only in the face of an existential political earthquake is there any chance that Canada will face its own problems. And maybe not even then. But pass a referendum, disrupt the country, start a cascade, let the dominoes fall. Now, your biggest danger, Alberta, in becoming an independent country is this: that you will keep the system that you are trying to escape. You are trying to rid yourselves of Canada. Rid yourselves of the Canada outside Alberta, but also rid yourselves of the Canada that is inside Alberta. That means you must get rid of the Westminster system of government. You must get rid of your managerial state. You must get rid of your single-payer public health care. You must get rid of the idea that there are different rights for different kinds of people. And you must get rid of the grift that also exists inside Alberta. Same kind of list. Government contracts, protected industries, carbon capture and storage. I don't need to go on. You know the list. This is happening in your backyard as well. If you want a free Alberta, these things must go. You must change the way you govern yourselves. Like, don't get rid of the tyranny from far away and fail to banish the tyranny that's right next door. Save yourselves, save Canada. Heck, you could save Western civilization. Alberta could be the new America. Now, by that, I do not mean necessarily that you will join the Americans. What I mean is, you could be the new America. You could be the 21st century America. In 2025, Alberta is in the same kind of situation that the Americans were in at the time of the Revolution. A hinterland being pushed around, its riches taken for the benefit of the established order far away, a lack of representation at the center, an abusive relationship taken for granted, pleas, and complaints ignored. America made itself the land of the free. They didn't just break away. They didn't just rid themselves of that particular king. They got rid of kings. They started again. If it is within you, Alberta can make itself more American than America. Take the best of what the Americans did and make it better. Fix it so that it actually works. Think big, Alberta. This is your moment to remake civilization. And there is nobody left to do it but you. And the moment may not come again. There is a tide in the affairs of men, Shakespeare wrote, which, taken at the flood, leads on to fortune. Seize the day. Enough of Canadian deference to authority. Don't be the schmucks paying the bill for this system of bribes. The American Declaration of Independence says that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of liberty, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, or to leave. Alberta, it is time for you to go. Thank you very much.
For those keeping track, we have 2 speakers left. And next to the stage is the founder and president of the Alberta Institute, an independent public policy think tank that aims to advance personal freedom and choice in Alberta. Please welcome to the stage, Peter McCaffrey.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for having me. As mentioned, my name is Peter McCaffrey, and I'm the president of the Alberta Institute. We're an independent libertarian research and advocacy organization that works to develop and promote practical solutions to a whole range of public policy problems, from municipal to provincial and federal, especially when it affects Alberta. And given the nature of the event tonight, I should remind everybody that we're also a nonpartisan organization, which in practical terms means that if the NDP want me to come and give this speech to their conference, I would also be happy to do that, although I'm guessing they might need someone to teach them some economics first. Now, in case you haven't worked it out yet from my accent, I'm not originally from Alberta. I was born in the UK, mostly grew up in New Zealand, and then moved to Canada in 2012, first to Saskatchewan to work for a think tank there, and then to Calgary in 2014 to work with Preston Manning at the Manning Centre. And then I founded the Alberta Institute in 2018. And some of you may be familiar with the Alberta Institute already, but if you aren't, I think it would be fair to say that we're now the largest think tank that is focused exclusively on Alberta issues, based right here in Calgary. Even if you aren't familiar with the Alberta Institute itself, you might be familiar with some of our other projects that we work on, things like Common Sense Calgary on municipal issues, Project Confederation, and also the Free Alberta Strategy, through which we wrote and advocated for the Alberta Sovereignty Act before Danielle Smith picked it up and campaigned on it in the UCP leadership race and subsequently in the 2023 election. And that brings me nicely to what I want to mostly focus on in my talk here, which I think is a slightly different way of thinking about the issue that we're here to discuss, and that I've been contemplating on for a while. And that contemplation actually goes back a number of years. Many of you here may know Professor Barry Cooper, political scientist at the University of Calgary, one of the famous Calgary School professors. And he was actually also one of the 3 authors who wrote the Free Alberta strategy that we published. Anyway, I've been lucky enough to benefit from Dr. Cooper's expertise on Western political philosophy on many occasions. But one particular idea that he talked to me about once kind of stuck in my mind, and it keeps coming back and becoming relevant more and more. And I probably won't give it the justification that it deserves, and I'm sure Barry could explain it better than I'm going to now. But roughly speaking, the idea that he communicated was that if anyone ever says to you that they would never, ever support separation, even in an extreme situation where the relationship between Canada and Alberta is far worse than it is right now, then they're not being rational. But equally, if there's no possible kind of relationship between Canada and Alberta, no matter how implausible, that could make you support wanting to Alberta to stay in Confederation, then you're also being irrational. Now, before those of you who've already made up your mind to leave kind of boo me off the stage, let me explain a little bit more in detail what I mean. I want you to imagine a line all the way across the stage, all the way from one end to the other. It's not a political spectrum, it's not left to right. It's just a line representing every possible version of Alberta's place in Confederation. So on one end of that line would be total federal control. A world where Ottawa governs Alberta entirely, where Alberta has no seats in Parliament, no say in the Senate, no judges on the Supreme Court, no ability to decide what happens in our own backyard. Almost every tax dollar goes east, not just the very large amount that goes east now. And, we could make up all sorts of other things. The Alberta legislature can't pass any law unless it's approved by the federal parliament, or whatever you want to come up with. And then on the other end of the line, imagine Alberta as an imperial power. Imagine if we got to elect every MP, not just the Alberta MPs, but all the other MPs in all the other provinces as well. Imagine we appoint every justice of the Supreme Court. We decide Quebec's language laws and Ontario's carbon taxes. Red Deer's the new national capital. Sorry for those of you who live in Red Deer. Money's now going to flow from Quebec to the west. Only electricity generated from oil and gas is allowed. No solar, no wind. That's all banned. Rodeo's the new national support. Every province must build 3 pipelines a month, and you're only allowed to eat pancakes for breakfast. Now, of course, those are extremes. They're silly examples. They'd never happen, and no one really even wants that. But imagine them as setting the outer bounds of this line. And then as we start to move inwards, things get more and more plausible, more and more possible. So if we were maybe here, a little bit in, maybe Alberta gets a guaranteed number of seats on the Supreme Court. Maybe we got bonus seats in the Senate and the House of Commons. Maybe we get vetoes on infrastructure projects in the East. That starts to sound a bit unfair to the East, right? But, those are the sorts of things that happen right now, only the other way around. Because somewhere around here is where we are right now. Quebec gets guaranteed seats on the Supreme Court. In fact, it's guaranteed in the Constitution. It's not just law. The concept of equalization, if not the formula, is entrenched in the Constitution. In the House of Commons, Quebec and the Atlantic provinces get bonus seats. I won't go through the full list of inequalities because you probably know many of them, and some of the speakers tonight have covered them too. But suffice to say that Confederation isn't fair. We're not here in the middle. We're somewhere over there in this example. And as outraged as Quebec and the East would be if the situation was somewhere here, that's how outraged we should be about it being down there. But that brings us to the question of, what does Alberta actually want? Or for those of you who've already given up, what did you used to want for Alberta? I think we want fairness. We want to be an equal partner in Confederation, not a junior one. We don't want more than other provinces, we just want the same. We don't want to be over here telling other provinces what to do. We just want them to stop telling us what to do. And that brings us to the efforts of the UCP since they got elected in 2019. First under Jason Kenney with the Fair Deal panel and the equalisation referendum, and now under Danielle Smith with the Alberta Sovereignty Act and the new Alberta Next panel announced today, and likely more upcoming of referendums. The efforts of the UCP have been designed to move us from somewhere over here towards the middle, towards more fairness. And again, I don't have the time to detail all of the efforts that are underway to move us towards fairness. But there is a problem, and I don't mean to downplay the efforts that have been made because they are significant and they are important. But the problem is that even if Ottawa gave us everything we want and everything that the Alberta government is asking for, we still wouldn't be here. We'd be maybe here. We just wouldn't be losing out as much as we used to. Just one example, instead of equalisation and federal transfers, the Alberta government is seeking an equal per capita transfer for various social programs. And when you say an equal per capita transfer, that sounds pretty fair. Every province gets an equal amount per capita. But you have to remember that Alberta pays more in. So if we pay more in and then we get an equal per capita amount back, we're still subsidizing the rest of the country. Not by as much as we are now, but we still would be subsidizing the rest of the country. And yet, for daring to even suggest that we move from here to here, we get called traitors. And we're attacked by the rest of the country, and they complain that we want special treatment. And that's the real crunch, because if Canada refuses to allow us to even move from there to here, never mind actually here to fairness, then what do we do? And that brings us to the question of separation. Now, separation is not on the line. It's not one of the positions on the line. Separation is stepping off the line entirely. And that's a big step. It's a step that many have already taken, many are close to being ready to, and some aren't. There's been some polls recently, I know polls, but the numbers have ranged from everything from 18% support for separation all the way up to 47%. So all we can really conclude from that is we really have no idea how popular it is yet. But putting aside percentages, I've been thinking about this, and I think it would be fair to say that Albertans roughly fit into 4 categories on this issue now. First, we've got people who understand the problem, they've given up on fixing it, and they're ready to leave. Second, there's people who understand the problem and are trying to fix it still, but who realize, or are maybe almost ready to realize, that it probably can't be fixed. Third, there's people who understand the problem and are trying to fix it and still think that it can be fixed. And then fourth, there's people who don't understand the problem. Because I really don't think there's anyone who understands the problem and doesn't want to fix it. Now, my job here today isn't to tell you which of those 4 categories you should fit into or where on the line would be fair. I'm just here to talk about the issues, suggest policy solutions, and try and make Alberta a better place. But I will make 2 observations. Those who don't want Alberta to separate should be working as hard as they possibly can to get fairness for Alberta and move us closer to the middle. Because the closer we get to the middle, the less likely it is that Albertans will want to separate. I'd go so far as to say we don't even need to get to here for most Albertans to be happy. But second, and perhaps a little counterintuitively, those who do want Alberta to separate should also be trying to get fairness for Alberta. And that's a little counterintuitive because yes, if those efforts succeed, it might make it a little harder to convince people to separate. But most of the things that would move Alberta closer to the middle aren't just good for Alberta, they're also things that Alberta would need to do before separating anyway. Things like setting up our own police force, our own pension plan, and taking over more provincial control of all sorts of different federal programs and systems. Plus, and I think this is really crucial, if you're right that Ottawa will never compromise and will never actually let us get fairness, then the more we try to fix things, the more Ottawa will say no, and the more that people who are still hoping that the problem can be fixed are likely to realize that it can't. So, in short, actually, whether you want to leave or not, or even if you're not sure, coincidentally or not, we're actually all on the same page for now in trying to pursue the same policies that will improve fairness for Alberta. And then I guess we'll have to see what Ottawa does. And that will really be, I think, what will decide this issue. So thank you for having me to speak. Please reach out to our Alberta Institute team if you have any questions on these or any other Alberta policy questions. And I look forward to chatting to you more afterwards. Thank you.
Catching me napping twice in one night. Unbelievable. Gotta give them credit. They've kept me on my heels tonight. Everybody's teasing me in the back about keeping them on task. Our final speaker of the evening. He's an Alberta lawyer with 30 years of experience, and he's crossed out my note here because I said primarily known for, and he just crossed out and said suing governments. Fair? What are the benefits of Alberta being within a united Canada or an independent nation? To discuss, please welcome Jeff Rath.
Wow, what a nice turnout tonight. So anyway, it's a real pleasure to be here this evening. I have to warn everybody tonight. I think my filter broke at some point today. I was in court earlier this afternoon on a class action that we're working on with regard to all the businesses that have been harmed and destroyed in Alberta by all of the horrible Jason Kenney COVID orders. And of course, I walked into court today, and our learned judge, who I quite like, Justice Feasby, came in and he said, I hope everybody doesn't mind. I've been really sick for the last week and I can barely talk. He said, I have COVID. I couldn't help it. No, it just slipped out of my mouth. The next words out of my mouth were, oh, so how are those vaccines working so far? It was, I have to say, I'm not proud of that. Was not my finest moment as an advocate. Because, as we all know, the first commandment of advocacy is written in stone, thou shalt not piss off thy judge. Not my finest moment. But anyway, I came here tonight to speak to a project that's certainly near and dear to my heart and the hearts of all the people and the hundreds of thousands of volunteers and supporters now of the Alberta Prosperity Project. Specifically, getting Alberta the hell out of Canada. And every day that we work on this project, we find a new reason to really internalize and understand that the Ontario or the Ottawa Liberals and Trudeau, then followed by Mark Carney, are an existential threat to Albertans and the province of Alberta. Just today, I was talking to a former Bank of Canada economist who reached out and volunteered to work for us, right, or work with us. And what we're working on right now, and I want to announce it after listening to Chris speak, we are in the process of finalizing a fully costed draft fiscal plan for an independent Alberta. And all of the things that Chris was saying that we need to take into account, including costing out an Alberta armed forces at 3% of GDP, external affairs, immigration. We call it the Immigration and Deportation Plan. Border security, policing, pensions, because me personally, and I think a lot of us in Alberta understand the disgusting levels of poverty that Canada has left our Indigenous people in for the last 150 years of that dysfunctional relationship. If it's possible, I think Ottawa hates Indigenous people more than they hate Albertans. If you've been to any communities in Northern Alberta and have experienced the abject poverty that Ottawa has kept those people in. So as a thought exercise, we tripled the amount of money being spent by Ottawa and Indigenous people in Alberta to $4.5 to $5 billion. Costed everything in, okay? And would anybody care to guess what the fiscal capacity surplus of Alberta will be after we stop sending $70 billion a year to Ottawa in taxes, CPP, and UI? The numbers range depending on assumptions made on spending, and we're trying to be as conservative as possible. The numbers range from $21 to $48 billion would be our fiscal capacity surplus the minute Alberta declared itself independent from Canada. Let that sink in. And, if people think about why it is we need to leave or should we leave or whatever it is, think about every single day there is a new assault on this province, on our culture, on our people, on our way of life. No sooner was Mark Carney re-elected or elected to the prime ministership. I shouldn't say re-elected, but he really was the hand up Trudeau's butt, making his mouth move like a puppet for the last 10 years. But anyway, no sooner did Carney come back into power than the Senate reintroduced the Universal Basic Income Bill, right? For those of you that don't know what this means, and its companion bill is an amendment to the Canada Elections Act, which would lower the voting age in Canada from 18 to 16, right? And the reason that they want to lower the voting age to 16, again, it's just more continued, let's keep re-electing Liberal governments, is because the Universal Basic Income Bill posits a world where every single person in Canada is given $2,000 a month. So think about that. So we have 17-year-old kids, they can drop out of school, right? They don't have to have a plan to go back to school. They don't have to have a plan to go to university, get a trade, get a job, have a plan to get a job. The minute they turn 16, they can vote for a Liberal government to give them $2,000 a month when they turn 17 so they can stay at home, smoke legalized marijuana, play video games, and basically become useless parasites within our society. Is this the plan that any of us had for our children or our grandchildren? Absolutely not. And if you think about Alberta and Alberta culture, we have a distinct culture, certainly distinct from Quebec's, which is really a culture of parasitism, where they literally live like leeches off of Alberta. And the only reason that they stay in Canada is because they can suck $15 billion a year out of all of your pockets so that they can run surplus budgets at our expense, while our governments have to borrow $6 billion a year to pay our nurses, our teachers, our doctors, our hospitals, our roads, et cetera, et cetera. The system is completely dysfunctional. The culture of Alberta, and of every Albertan in this room, I would wager, is that we are a hardworking, fiercely independent people. We want to wake up in the morning, we want to go to work, we want to support our families, we want to take care of our kids, we want to take care of our grandkids, we want to take care of our parents, and most of all, we want governments to stay the hell out of our lives. This is not the culture of Quebec. This is not the culture of Ontario. They want to involve themselves in every single aspect of our lives, including how much oil and gas we can produce, how much CO2 we're permitted to emit into the atmosphere to help our forests grow, to help our crops grow, to help our plants grow in the province. No, they want to limit all of that, which is really their way of preventing us from prospering. typically, when I'm giving this talk, I'm following Dennis Modry, who has a slide, that basically shows that, Ottawa has intentionally, since the 1980s, kept Alberta down in its place economically. I think some of the earlier speakers, have shown that. It's been deliberate. Mark Lalonde, one of, Trudeau's right-hand hatchet men in 1980, prior to the inception of the NEP, basically stated we need to do something to prevent Alberta from becoming too powerful, because we do not want Alberta to be the center of finance and economics in Canada. For Eastern politicians, there is nothing worse than thinking about all of the corporate headquarters in Toronto and Quebec moving to Alberta and having them left with nobody to take bribes from other than the Hells Angels. Right? That's a nightmare for them, right? So our project moving forward, quite frankly, is, to show Albertans that we are going to be significantly better off outside of Canada than we are in it. And rather than, we can focus on grievances all night long. There's no shortage of them. I mean, just quickly, Senate seats as an example, right? Newfoundland has basically, double the population of Red Deer? They have 6 Senate seats. Prince Edward Island has 4 Senate seats. Nova Scotia and New Brunswick each have 10. So collectively, the Maritimes, right, with half the population of Alberta, collectively, they have 2.5 million people. They have 30 Senate seats to our 6, right? Supreme Court seats. Ontario has 3. Quebec has 3. The Maritimes have 1, and all of the West, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia have 2 seats. So is it any wonder that anytime we go up to the Supreme Court on a division of powers issue, surprise, surprise, the Supreme Court of Canada rules against Alberta? The vested power structure of this country and the structure of Canadian federalism is designed to keep Alberta in its place as a colony, basically generating wealth for Eastern Canada at the expense of every Albertan and every person in this room. That's the way the country was designed. It was designed intentionally, and we have been basically on the receiving end of it as a colonized and oppressed people since the inception of Alberta as a province in 1905. That's all there is to it. The good news for us is that there's a way forward. And the way forward, quite frankly, is for all of us to organize, all of us to talk to our friends and neighbors. I'm going to be so happy when that draft fiscal plan is out, because I think it's going to be a game changer for the Alberta independence movement. I won't share the person's name, but a very prominent member of the UCP reviewed the document for me. And the comment was, wow, if we don't implement this, we're going to be guilty of a breach of fiduciary obligation towards the people that elected us. And I want people to think about that. And I want, obviously I have a lot of respect for our premier. She has a very difficult job walking the tightrope that she's walking. But, I would like all of us to remind her and have her internalize the fact that the standard of a fiduciary is a reasonably prudent person of business managing their own affairs. So if somebody were told that there was a way out of the complete mess that Alberta is in on a constant basis, with our industries being penalized, with our citizens, randomly being, rendered unemployed at the whim of some politician in Ottawa, that our private property, whether it be our firearms or anything else, can be subject to confiscation at the flick of a pen by some moron living in a cottage, right? Would we think that's acceptable? And if somebody were to show, a fiduciary, here's a plan, to get forward and to approve the lot of the people that you're responsible to, that will show, literally, a $40 billion fiscal surplus that could be immediately applied to tax savings to reduce everybody's tax bill in this province by, 30 to 50% in year 1, right? it would be irresponsible not to implement that plan and to proceed with that plan. And I'm stating clearly that it's a breach of fiduciary duty on the part of our elected officials not to pursue that plan. And I think some of you may know a number of, it's probably over a month ago now, it's been a bit of a whirlwind. I've become a road warrior along with Mitch Sylvester, traveling to various points in the province. I was up in Bonnyville the other night and then back home and then in court and Cochrane last night and then here tonight. But, one of the things that's become really evident across the province is that the forces of federalism, including Premier Smith, are completely incapable of telling us why it is that we're going to be better off if we stay in Canada, right? I wrote an open letter and just off the top of my head, I listed the top 10 reasons we'd be better off if we left Canada, kind of like a Letterman's top 10 list, right? Number 1, no more federal regulation of citizens of Alberta, right? Number 2, no more federal income tax. Number 3, no more carbon tax, industrial or personal. Number 4, no more capital gains tax. Number 5, you could go on and on. Right? And again, what are we being told in exchange? Well, maybe we'll get a pipeline. They might give us a pipeline. That would be good. Even if we did get a pipeline, so what? Right? We have, we have short-term jobs in construction. We have billionaires getting richer. And, right, there's another $20 billion that goes into the Alberta Treasury. So apparently we can afford to give more money to the parasites in Quebec that live off of every person in this room. And what I say is enough is enough. That we need to get ourselves out of the mentality that somehow or other, and I think Professor Party said it very well, that any attachment we had to what used to be Canada is anything worth protecting or pining for nostalgically, because the Canada that we all grew up in does not exist anymore. We now live in a Canada where if Albertans, people from Saskatchewan, people from right across the country, even from Quebec, show up in Ottawa to protest something that a Liberal government is doing that seems dictatorial and nonsensical, what's the response? They invoke the Emergencies Act and have riot police and horses trample little old Indigenous women in the streets because they can't stand being told that they can't do what they want whenever they want to do it. That's not the country I grew up in, and it's not the country that I want to leave my daughter. All of us that are involved in this movement, we're not doing it for ourselves. None of us, and I can promise you, I've avoided political office my entire life and career as a barrister. I have no intention of ever seeking public office, neither is Mitch Sylvester or anybody else that we're working with. What we are trying to do is to make a better world and a better country, specifically Alberta as a country, for our children and our grandchildren and all the future generations that come after us. Right now, and again, this Bank of Canada economist today, like every time I talk to somebody, I become more depressed or more shocked about the mess that we're being led into. He said, he says, you ever wonder why everything seems like it costs twice as much as it did, 5 or 10 years ago? And I said, I said, ever since COVID, it's like every time I turn around, it's like, you can't even plan a family vacation by going, wow, this was not this much money 2 years ago or 3 years ago. He said, he says, you know what the root cause of that is that nobody's talking about? Under Trudeau, forget about the deficits, right? And keep in mind, the guy that's telling me this is the former Bank of Canada guy. He says, under Trudeau, with Carney's advice, because keep in mind, Carney was a central banker. Are you ready for this? Trudeau doubled the M2 money supply in Canada. So basically, under Trudeau, he doubled the amount of Canadian dollars in circulation, so that our dollars are literally worth half as much as they were when he came in. The only reason I think a lot of us haven't noticed it is we had the same people applying the same idiotic monetary theories under Joe Biden. So the spread between the Canadian dollar and the US dollar over the last little while didn't get that far out of whack, but it was only because the Americans were engaged, and the American Federal Reserve was engaged in the same level of stupidity, literally doubling the amount of money in circulation without any care or thought for the fact that you do that. It's basic economics 101, right? You're reducing the value of the monetary unit by 50%. Like when that hit me the other day, I was just like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense, right? But that's what we have to look forward to. And keep in mind what we're dealing with. When I say Mark Carney is an existential threat to Alberta, he is the one that engineered that. Do you think there's not going to be more money printing under Carney? How is he going to pay for the 150 billion euros / 225 million Canadian dollars that he's going to put into Europe to defend Europe? Who in this room voted for that? Right? No one. So, that's what we're dealing with going forward. And then they just passed Bill C-5, which is literally, if anybody actually, remembers their history and remembers, where the word fascist came from in World War II, that was a term coined by Mussolini, fascisti. It meant all together, working together, government hand in glove with industry. So basically, the whole program that Carney has now, they call it, the WEF calls it stakeholder capitalism, right? It's really crony capitalism, where Mark Carney and all of his buddies are lining up to build a $50 billion carbon sucking machine in Alberta that we don't need, that we're going to pay for, right? In order to decarbonize our oil. Has anybody heard anything so stupid? And hear from me that when Carney talks about an energy corridor, he's not talking about oil and gas pipelines. He's talking about electrifying the country from coast to coast to coast, with Brookfield supplying modular nuclear reactors as booster stations so that we don't have line loss. And that's how he's going to power all of the electric vehicles in Alberta when he takes our cars and trucks away. So Carney's future for Alberta is that all of us are going to be trying to suffer through a winter at -40 with vehicles that won't go 100 kilometers. And every time we need to stop to charge, we plug them in and all of our money goes straight to Brookfield. That's the future that Carney has planned for us. And we say that there's a real easy way out of that, and a really simple way forward to get us out of the fascist hell that Mark Carney has planned for us, or that World Economic Forum has planned for us. And that is simply for all of us to unite around one simple idea, that Alberta is going to be much better off outside of Canada as an independent country on a going forward basis, with our own economy, our own currency, and complete control of our own destiny here in Alberta. So thank you very much for listening to me tonight. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure and a real honor to be able to speak to my fellow Albertans. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time and attention this evening. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to invite Daryl and Eric back up. They got some closing remarks for me. Thank you for allowing me to be the host again, and for entertaining a few jokes for me, and Grok inspired as well. Once again, Daryl and Eric.
Are we there? Thank you, Sean.
Thanks very much, Sean.
Where do we want this podium, Eric? Should we move this podium that way? I know. Let's just move it ahead of the line. Yeah, there we go. That's better. I want to get away from the line. Are you okay? Are you all right?
I don't know if is it okay to stand off the line?
Well, I don't want to be on the line. I'm just afraid where I would be on the line, because if I have to be over there, I don't want to be over there.
I'm not going over there.
I kind of like over there.
Where does everyone else want to be?
Okay. Eric, it's an amazing evening. We have so many things to summarize. I think first we should thank people. We have an amazing group of supporting CAs all across Alberta. They're watching live. We want to thank everybody from Wetaskiwin to Sherwood Park, up to Grand Prairie, Lloydminster. We're down in southern Alberta. We're here in Calgary. It's really amazing to see the level of engagement that we have been able to create with the current UCP provincial CAs. And I think a lot of that's due to the leadership that we're getting from the membership group, from the UCP itself. And that would be, I think, somewhere here. Mr. Rob Smith is here. He's the president. And the CFO, Jack Redekop, is here today, too. Oh, and here's Abigail over there. Thank you. I know Vicky's watching because I saw she bought a ticket. Thank you for your money, Vicky. What's important with everything that we're doing is the engagement that we're able to do by talking to people and to get other people to listen. And when we come up with names, Eric and I literally may indulge in a few beers in order to come up with the titles. The Courage to Listen was really something that was rooted in the campaign when we were knocking on doors. And we realized that if we actually listened, and we knew we had to win one vote at a time, we had to talk to people one at a time in order to convince them to vote for Eric, because he was a total unknown and we were in Jason Kenning's riding, right? It was a monumental task. And Eric and his wife, Roxanne, they're huge sports. My wife, Marilyn, of course, she's so supportive. She goes, well, go ahead. I says, do you think we can make it? Yeah, go ahead, honey. I think, and she cheers and she's there for us. And Roxanne's the same way, because we tend to get ourselves in trouble because we want to engage in a conversation.
Couldn't have said it better. We often shoot first and ask questions after, but
Leadership.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And a beer.
Yeah, and we're okay with firing our comments and understanding that we could be wrong. And we're all right with that, being wrong. But more times out of not, we're right. Now, okay, just about always we're right. Yes. And our wives would agree with that for most of the time. Yeah. Now, over here, when we started, we said we were going to create a framework for a sovereign Alberta within a united Canada. Now, when we do an event, we create a hypothesis, like we did with an injection of truth, and we want people to be proven right or to be proven wrong. And this evening, we tried to provide a great cross-section of information for you that would actually allow for you to structure in your head a framework for a sovereign Alberta and where that would be. Now, fortunately, Ben literally wrote a framework for a sovereign Alberta. He literally wrote it, okay? We might actually tour around Alberta and ask people about the framework as opposed to walking around Alberta and asking for more questions for the referendum. So there's the framework for a sovereign Alberta within a united Canada. And I happen to have a very early copy called The Value of Freedom, which is the fiscal framework for the Alberta Prosperity Project, and literally hundreds of people that have contributed to the economics in here. Again, another framework. So what we ask people to do is to challenge those one way or the other on what is your framework for a sovereign Alberta, because that's ultimately what we want. Because the framework itself will answer the questions and eliminate fear. And what we're faced with is people who are afraid and will be made to feel immensely afraid. And why is that? Well, the conservative government or federal conservatives, they don't win another election without Alberta. Are they going to be happy with a sovereign Alberta? No. Did you know, and I didn't hear it today, but all the royalty money paid to Alberta goes to the CIBC in Toronto first, and then it comes back to Alberta. Does that make any sense? We have our own bank, the ATB. Like, why do we do that? So what we're saying here today, culturally, and this was one of the points in Ben's presentation, is that if we have a UCP government, that government needs to govern for all of Albertans through the policies of the party and representing the policies and values of the party, because those are the people that actually knock on the doors and donate money to get them elected. But we have, as has been described, a government here that works for all people because they were used to having huge majorities, right? I mean, wasn't it that Lougheed actually made some of his own people be the opposition one time? Remember that? And so it's imperative that there is a shift, a monumental shift in government thinking, that they actually work for the people who get them elected. Elected. Because in the last 2.5 years, Eric and I have worked on a lot of projects to bring awareness to COVID, damages of COVID, about safe and effective, about the porn that's in schools, about the pension, and now we're trying to bring some sort of light on sovereignty. And you're going to hear a lot of things about sovereignty. Some of the things, Eric doesn't want to say anything because I don't want to get him in trouble, so I'll just do the talking. And sometimes we have to do that. But what you have to realize is that you will make the difference. Okay, it's not us. It's definitely not the government or any government. It will be the people who make the changes. And that can be peacefully, and that can be done quickly. So whenever you hear someone want to kick the can, let's talk about it. Let's study about it. Let's get more feedback. Like whatever that sounds like. You all know what that sounds like. That means that they don't want to make change now that they know that they can make, right? We know we can have provincial police. We know we can control immigration. We know that we can have an Alberta pension. We know we can have EI benefits. We know everything that we can do in here that successive governments, blue or orange, have not done them. And why is that? They don't want to. They don't want to. And they don't want to because they're not encouraged by it. You are the only encouragement they need. You and your friends and the voters of Alberta need to encourage governments to look out for you because you are Albertans. I mean, we've had 2 Quebecers and a guy from Ontario come up here tonight and say, "What the hell are you doing?" Seriously, is that really possible? Like, I don't know. I think we got the parting of the Red Sea here because that's the kind of night we've had. So think about it. As Albertans, are we treated fairly by Ottawa? Yes or no? No one said yes. With that thought in your mind and in your heart, you realize that we have a character problem with the genesis story of the country. That's what Bruce Party says. We were told to think big. And think big means to have no fear. We know that Mark Carney wrote a book on values that wants to keep the oil in the ground. Who's to say he's going to change his mind? Oh, sorry, I wrote a book. It was a bestseller. All the Liberals bought it. Everyone at the World Economic Forum bought it. And that's who I am. Remember, this is the guy who was run out of Europe. He was run out of the UK because he did not support Brexit. And now he wants Canada to be part of the European Union. Okay, so we're going to get a pipeline, and it's going to lower the temperature. But that's just wrong, because it's fundamentally broken. And so, it's up to you, with what you know, to power through. We will send to everyone a copy of Ben's proposal. We will send to you next Thursday when this manifesto, no, the value of freedom is put forward. We will send it to you because you are here. And if you're online, you can go to our website, ucp-calgary-lougheed.ca, and you can sign up to receive all the documentation that's here. We will post it there. We will keep you informed, and we will keep Alberta strong and free.
I don't hear me? I don't think there's much more I can add to that. Very well said. So on that note, I'd like to thank all of our speakers tonight, all of our volunteers. Thank you so much again for another successful night. And I'd like to thank everyone in the audience and those who have bought a ticket and who are having a virtual party somewhere across the province. Thank you all again for having the courage to listen, and look forward to many more. Have a good night.
Have a good night, everyone. Thank you.
So once again, those of you who are just joining right now, why join now? Just wait till we're done. And as soon as I'm done, then you can go back and you can watch the entire thing. It's difficult to do that when it's alive. This has been a presentation of the Calgary-Lougheed UCP presenting the Courage to Listen, Building a Framework for a Sovereign Alberta. And of course, we had our 2 hosts there. There was Eric Bouchard and Daryl Comic. from the UCP Lougheed. I'm going to continue on, if you don't mind. I'm going to, can I turn this off? Yeah, I can turn this off. I'm going to end up continuing the speech that I had queued up already from Tanner Naday from the APP event yesterday, and he probably spoke about 5 minutes. I'm sure there's about 15 more minutes. Really good stuff, and what he's talking about is the perception that there's no way that APP or that Alberta could separate or be independent from Canada because it is landlocked. And he actually just said, no, we are policy locked. And with that, I'm going to present that, and then I'll come back and wrap it up. But thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you guys in a few minutes.
And America's trade treaties, that there are provisions, as an Albertan, I do not like. One such provision or lack of provision is there is no guarantee for pipeline infrastructure in this trade treaty. We don't have any of it. That's not in the treaty. It's also true that the current trade treaty between America and Canada does not ban cool-style packaging, you know, or country of origin labeling, which can be discriminatory against Alberta ranchers and so on. There is no outright exclusion of that problem. But it's not as though Alberta right now can go to America and say, oh, hi, we'd like to renegotiate the terms of the deal. There are some things here that we do not like. No. That isn't given to us. No, instead, the best we can do right now is go to Ottawa and tell Ottawa what would be good for Alberta in these trade negotiations and in these treaties, and then watch as Ottawa does exactly the opposite. That's the way it works in Confederation right now. But let's suppose you were independent. Let's suppose that Alberta were its own, not governed by Canada's Constitution any longer. Who would negotiate trade treaties between Alberta and America? Alberta. You would have representatives from Alberta negotiating for Alberta. You would not have bureaucrats in Ottawa negotiating for Alberta with the Americans. Instead, we would come to the table as partners with America, going back and forth about how we think these treaties ought to be structured. And we could create something which is superior for our products compared to what we have right now. Canada couldn't say, oh, you can't do that. We wouldn't be governed by Canada's Constitution anymore. What is the second way that you can navigate landlocking? Well, you can trade across provincial borders. You can trade with BC, you can trade with Saskatchewan and Manitoba and Ontario and so on. You can go east and west. That is one such way you can do so. And that is the thing that we do right now. Again, as I told you, Alberta exports about $76 billion worth of goods domestically every year. That's a lot of money. And it's an excellent thing. I like trading with my neighbors. I want to continue trading with my neighbors. I want to increase trade with my neighbors. Why not? It increases our quality of life. But once again, I want to draw your attention to this point. It is not as though Alberta has the right, if it so chooses, to restrict trade between the provinces if there's a problem when you're negotiating with the provinces. So let's suppose that, BC is playing difficult and isn't letting us get to coast as we want. It's not as though Alberta has the power to say, we're going to put a tariff, therefore, on every good coming from BC going over to the east. This power is not given to Alberta right now. Under Section 121 of the Constitution, again, that is regulated by the federal government, that sort of trade. And in at least some sense, not really, but kind of, Alberta tried to exercise a bit of muscle. You see, Alberta passed what is known as Bill 12 a few years ago. And in essence, Bill 12 says this. As you know, we ship a lot of oil. I'll talk about that in a moment. And Bill 12 says, if enacted, oil companies have to go to the provincial government and they have to apply for a license to ship their oil out of province. And if the federal government denies them that license, then they can't ship oil out of the province. And they exercise some, Alberta exercises some economic muscle. But that went to court, that bill. Bill 12 went to court. It's tied up in court. It's being hammered out in court. And the general consensus is that that is not Alberta's jurisdiction. We do not have the right, as it stands right now, to deny our neighbors these goods, to try and entice them to, see our point of view, for lack of a better word. And so Bill 12 really hasn't even been mentioned since it was passed. It's practically inert. And we do not have a lot of negotiating power. But once again, let's suppose that Alberta were independent. Let's suppose that we were independent of Canada. Now, I'm not saying you should do this. I'm instead saying this would be a tool in our toolbox. If we wanted to get our goods to the coast, and the provinces and federal government, Canada, were playing difficult, we could say now, fine, so be it. We're going to put a tariff on every single good coming from the Vancouver port going east, or vice versa. If you have goods coming from the east, we're going to put a tariff on them when they cross through Alberta's borders and try to get to the Pacific coast. It's a new piece of leverage, a new tool that is right now not ours to use, would increase our negotiating prowess with the federal government. We really have none of it right now. Alberta has no negotiating leverage whatsoever. That really is the point of my speech. As it stands, we can't control trade that comes through our province and goes to other provinces. Not really. If you were independent, you would be able to do so. Which leads me to my third and final point. How do you navigate the landlocking problem? This point here is what's on everyone's mind. The final way to navigate the landlocking problem is to use other provinces' services and land to get to port, to get to the coast, and then ship your goods all over the world. So I told you that Alberta exports about $183 billion of goods internationally every year. That's true. I told you that 90% of those goods go to America, or just under that, which is true. What I have not yet told you are what those exports are. But you don't need me to tell you. You already know what they are. The top 3 exports from Alberta are heavy oil, refined oil, and beef. Those are the big 3 exports from Alberta, and heavy oil constitutes 75% of those top 3 exports. Like, we export millions of barrels of oil to America every single day. Alberta doesn't just have a lot of oil. We have an unfathomable amount of oil. We have so much oil that if you were to take all the proven, and this is just what's proven, if you were to take all of the proven barrels of oil in this province, and if you were to divvy it up equally to each Alberta resident, young or old, each Alberta resident would have or command 5.1 million liters of oil. That's how much oil we have. This alone ranks us top 3, top 4 in the entire world, on par with the OPEC heavy hitters. So we export a lot of that oil. But there are other markets besides America that's calling for energy, or that are calling for energy right now. You have a lot of Asian markets that want as much energy as they can consume. And we have that supply here in Alberta, but there's a problem. We can't get it to the coast. If you're going to get it to the Asian markets, you have to get it to the coast first and load it onto a tanker to then ship it across the sea. How are we going to get it to the coast? Well, you say by pipeline, that's true. How are we going to get a pipeline built? Look at Keystone XL, look at Northern Gateway. 525,000 barrels of oil every day was supposed to go to Kitimat. Failed. Look at Energy East, 1 million plus barrels going to the Eastern Bloc every day. Failed. Look at Trans Mountain. You say, oh, we built Trans Mountain. Well, yeah, but we built it at 5+ times the original cost after government bought it. So that's not efficient. Look at Keystone XL. I know the president canceled Keystone XL, 800-some thousand barrels going down to the Gulf Coast every day, but does anyone here think that we had serious representation in Ottawa negotiating for our interests with that pipeline? So you have all of these blocked pipelines. I was listening just the other day to Mark Carney. It was very brave of me, I know. And I was listening to him and his cabinet and a few other Liberal ministers talk about how there now has to be, or is going to have to be, unanimous consent from among the provinces to build a pipeline. And if that's the case, we will never, as it stands right now, get a pipeline built again. Not one pipeline will ever be built again, not if that's the rule. You will not see unanimous consent. So what are we supposed to do? We want to get our oil to the coast? We can't do so right now, and we don't have a lot of negotiating leverage. We can't say, well, we're going to go down to America and build a pipeline, because as it stands right now, that is not our jurisdiction. We can't negotiate with America. That's Ottawa's jurisdiction. We can't block trade between the provinces. That's Ottawa's jurisdiction. Well, maybe we can turn off the taps. Maybe we'll invoke some of that Klein wisdom, that Klein negotiating prowess, and turn off the taps. It would be a heavy blow to the rest of Canada. But once again, you have to remember that pipelines from Alberta, which move outside of the province, are federal jurisdiction. Those are federally regulated pipelines. It's not as though we can just shut off line 3 or line 5 and say no more oil. No. No, the federal government would have to do so, which we know, even though they claim to hate oil and gas, as it stands, they would never do. That is not our jurisdiction, so we can't even do that. Finally, what are we going to say to the Liberal government? We're not going to vote for you next election unless you give us a pipeline? That's not much of a threat either. The picture I've painted for you here in these few minutes is that an Alberta within Confederation is an Alberta without leverage. We are treated like a child by Ottawa. It's not as though we go to the negotiating table with Ottawa as equal partners. That is not the way Confederation works. Ottawa says you will be doing this and you will be doing that, or else. And Alberta could say, but, and Ottawa will just reply, look at the Constitution. You have no jurisdiction in this area. This is my job, not yours. We don't have leverage in an Alberta within Confederation. That's just the way it's set up. At the same time, I painted a picture for you that said, look, if we were independent, we would have leverage. If we were an independent Alberta, for the first time in our history, we would have leverage to negotiate with not only Ottawa, but with all of these other countries all around the world. So there'd still be challenges getting pipelines, to the coast. But if Ottawa said no pipeline, we could say, fine, we're going to go talk to America. Or we could say, fine, we're going to begin putting tariffs on your goods coming from BC going east and vice versa. And those pipelines that originate in Alberta, even if they move outside of Alberta, the portion of pipeline within the province would not be federal government jurisdiction. It would be Alberta jurisdiction. We would have all of these new tools, which are not now available to us. You see, for far too long, Ottawa has been permitted and has indeed wielded a sledgehammer and swung a sledgehammer, while Alberta has been forced to use a feather. That's the way it's been for how many decades now? Decade after decade after decade. But I think that time is over. I think it's time Alberta began negotiating for itself. I think it's time Alberta began pursuing its own interests. I think it's time Alberta began pursuing the rights to the, life and the family and freedom and economic flourishing. For itself, and I think it's time Alberta picked up a hammer of its own and began negotiating and pursuing a future for ourselves, our children, our grandchildren, and our posterity to come. Thank you.
Well, that wraps up the night here. We're talking about APP and talking about the independence and there really is so much to talk about. But I'm so glad that you were able to tune in and to see exactly what some of this is going on. We're going to try and do another podcast with Chris and myself coming up soon to talk about everything that's happened in the last couple of weeks including the by-election in Alberta and and how that works for independents, what our thoughts are on that. Maybe we'll even have Cam Davies back on to talk about some stuff. And of course, if you've been under a rock, because that's what people do. If you've been under a rock and you don't even know what any of this is all about, I just want to point out that we are doing stuff with the Alberta Prosperity Project, and we have changed our tagline. I noticed a couple of the comments during the presentation today from the UCP about saying that Alberta Prosperity Project is all about sovereignty. I've had lots of conversations in the last few weeks, if not few months, with people about the difference between sovereignty and independence and separation. And, they all kind of mean something to everybody. But if at least you agree on everything that was presented tonight, or maybe just a good portion of it, I do advise you, please go to the AlbertaProsperityProject.com, submit your pledge to vote for an independent Alberta. What does that actually mean? All it means is we just ask for your contact information, your email, so that when the referendum is actually going to happen, we have your contact and we can go bang on your door. We can give you a call. We can send you an email, let you know how you can actually get involved as a volunteer, or ideally sign the referendum in order to get to that process. So that's kind of the idea. And what I wanted to do, of course, with Tanner and the Day coming up, is we're still doing these events all the way through the province for the next until we can't, let's put it that way. And you can go on to the AlbertaProsperityProject.com site, go under the events, and here you will see we've got some coming up here. We've got Airdrie, Hinton, Entwistle, sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, Alberta Beach, Spruce Grove, Fort Saskatchewan, Rimbey, and those are the ones that are just planned right now. But we've been literally all over the province in the last few months, anywhere from Grand Prairie to Bonnyville, Coal Lake, Peace River, all the way down to Cardston, Lethbridge, Medicine Hat, you name it, and all points in between. So if you missed us on the first time around, please send a message and say, you know what, we'd really like to get involved. And likewise, we want to be able to do these presentations online in order to, if you can't get away. A perfect example, if you were in Edmonton and you didn't want to drive down to Calgary to see the presentation today with the UCP, then by all means, let us know, and we will see what we can possibly do with that. Again, APP is not nonpartisan. I'm doing this just because it's the Chris and Kerry Show, and I can do that. I can actually talk out both sides of my mouth. I'm not going to do that. It is about independence and sovereignty and all those points in between. And with that, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you. I've been online here since 5. You probably didn't know that. And it is now 9:20, and so I've had a half a bowl of popcorn. That's my dinner so far. I'm going to eat the other half and maybe have a good Alberta steak too. I think those go together, don't they? Corn on the cob and there you go. Now I'm delirious. So I hope we will see you guys again soon. And with that, you guys have an amazing night. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to wrap this off with our introduction. If you're really observant, we have 2 introductions, one that shows coffee and one that shows beer. And I think for tonight, I'm going to show beer, if you don't mind doing that. Talk to you guys later. Thanks.